Welcome in the journey of time. Tonight, we'll dive into another chapter of history, a tale waiting quietly in the dark. Perhaps you're resting in bed, or simply letting the echoes of the past keep you company. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment if you like. I always love knowing the places these words would reach. If this gentle journey through time brings you repose and comfort, I'd be honored if you hit the like and subscribe. And now, here's the story. The Stormbringer's Vigil. In the time before kings, when the world was a tablet of wet clay awaiting the stylus of the gods, the skies belonged to Adad, the Storm Lord. His voice was the thunder, his tears the rain, and his fury the deluge. Humanity, newly molded from clay and divine blood, cowered in the fragile spaces between river and desert. They prayed for rain, but dreaded the flood. Witnessing this mortal terror, a thought, profound and strange, stirred within the heart of the tempest. Adad, in a moment balanced between destruction and compassion, plucked a bolt of living lightning, the heart of a desert lion, and the talons of a mountain eagle. He fused them with the resilient form of a man. This was no god, nor beast, nor man, but a child of necessity, the first Ugallu, a great storm creature. His purpose was etched into his very being, to stand in the breach, to mediate the storm's wrath, to be a protector who walked within the catastrophe. He was named Ur-Ningish-Zida, the guardian of the true tree, for he was to be the living pillar connecting the devastating heavens to the enduring earth. The shape of the storm. Ur-Ningish-Zida's awakening was not a birth, but a sudden, violent coalescence. Consciousness sparked within a maelstrom over the black, churning waters of the Abzu, the primordial deep. He did not open eyes. Light and sensation ignited within him. His body, a sculpture of taut muscle and sinew, wrapped in skin the hue of a bruise-purple twilight, thrummed with residual lightning. He became aware of a heavy, muscled neck supporting a head crowned with a thick mane of wiry, storm-gray hair. A lion's muzzle, equipped with teeth capable of splintering cedar, took in the electrified air. His hands, five-fingered and human, clenched and unclenched, while from his calves sprout powerful, scaled legs, terminating in the cruel, curved talons of an eagle, each capable of gripping stone until it cracked. He fell from the cloud ceiling, not with a plunge, but with a controlled, spiraling descent. The talons met the mud of a riverbank with a soft, deep thum. The world presented itself in a flood of raw data, the metallic scent of impending rain, the desperate chirrup of insects, the distant, panicked bleating of goats from a human settlement upstream. His mind, a fusion of animal instinct, divine insight, and nascent reason, sorted these signals. The primary impulse, a commandment burned into his spirit, overrode all else. Mitigate, protect, intercede. His first steps were unsteady, the talons sinking deep into the soft earth. He moved toward the settlement, a cluster of reed huts huddled beneath a stand of date palms. The people saw him emerge from the curtain of rain, a silhouette more terrible than any wolf or lion. A woman drawing water from the river dropped her clay jar. It shattered. A collective gasp, then a scream, tore through the hamlet. They saw a demon, a walking manifestation of the storm that threatened their fields. They hurled clods of mud and sharpened reeds. One stone struck Orningizita's chest. He felt the impact, a dull pressure, but no pain. A profound sadness, a cold, heavy stone in his gut settled where pain should have been. He did not roar. He knelt, his lion's head lowering in a gesture no beast would make. With one clawed hand, he pointed to the swollen, angry river, then to a low-lying granary built too close to the bank. He made a sweeping motion toward higher ground. His voice, when he finally used it, was a low rumble, the grating of boulders deep within the earth. The water comes. Here, bad. There, good. The people froze, caught between terror and bafflement. The headman, an old man with eyes webbed by years of squinting at sun and flood, stepped forward. His name was Enlil Bani, a farmer who had survived 3 floods. He looked past the lion's head, the talons, and met the creature's eyes, eyes that held not mindless hunger, but a fierce, intelligent luminance. "You are from Adad?" Enlil Bani asked, his voice trembling only slightly. "I am of Adad," Orningizita corrected, the concept difficult to shape with his new tongue. "The storm, my father. Your drowning, not his wish. I am the barrier." Then the skies broke. Rain fell not in drops, but in sheets. The river, a lazy brown serpent only moments before, surged, its banks dissolving. The granary groaned. Orningizita moved. His movement was a blur of terrifying efficiency. He did not run, he loped, his eagle feet giving him a traction that defied the slick mud. He reached the granary as its supports began to buckle. Ignoring the screaming farmers, he plunged his arms into the structure, not through the door, but through the wall, his talons ripping the reeds apart. He emerged with a huge sack of emmer wheat in each hand. He carried them, not to the path, but straight up the steep embankment to a rocky outcrop, his talons finding purchase where no human foot could. He returned, again and again, 7 trips until the granary stood empty. On the 8th, the structure collapsed into the rushing waters. He stood on the outcrop, rain streaming down his mane, his chest heaving. The people, huddled under skins on the high ground, stared. They were saved. Their food was saved. The demon had not devoured them. He had worked alongside them, but with the strength of 10 oxen. Enlil Bani approached again, this time with a clay bowl of sour beer, an offering. Orningizita looked at it, then at the man. He took the bowl, his lion's lips awkward around the rim, and drank. The gesture was clumsy, profoundly alien, yet deeply, unequivocally civil. In that moment, beneath the weeping sky, a pact was forged, not in words, but in shared mud, saved grain, and a sip of bitter beer. The guardian had found his people, and they, however fearfully, had glimpsed their guardian. The language of stone and wind. Ur-Ningishzida did not leave the settlement, which was called Gwyddina, the edge of the plain. He became its silent, looming shadow. He dwelled not within the circle of huts, but on the high outcrop, a sentinel post overlooking the river and fields. His needs were few. He drank from the rain pools and seemed to draw sustenance from the very electricity in the air after a storm. His days were spent learning. His first teacher was the world itself. He watched the jackals hunt, noting their cooperation. He observed the eagles ride thermal currents, understanding the patterns of the wind. He studied the river's moods, learning to predict its rises from the scent of the air and the behavior of the birds. But his second, more complex teacher was humanity. Enlilbani's granddaughter, a sharp-eyed child of 7 named Ninhilia, became the bridge. Where adults saw terror, she saw curiosity. One morning, she approached the outcrop, clutching a baked clay doll. She stood, small and defiant, and held it up. "This is Inanna," she declared. "She is a goddess. She likes songs. Do you like songs?" Ur-Ningishzida tilted his lion's head. The human voice was an intricate thing, a cascade of nuanced tones. "Songs are wind with meaning," he rumbled. Ninhilia grinned, a gap-toothed smile. "Yes, I will teach you a song. It is about the barley." She sang a simple, repetitive tune about planting and rain. Ur-Ningishzida listened. The structure of the language began to unlock itself. Nouns were objects, concrete. Verbs were actions, movements. The prepositions and conjunctions, the to, from, and, but, these were the true mysteries, the ligaments that connected the bones of thought. He began to practice when alone, his grating voice murmuring the names of things: rock, river, cloud, rain, child, fear, help. He practiced gestures, learning to moderate his movements. A human hand could pick a date without pulping it. He had to learn the precise pressure. He watched men repair a hut, noting the way they lashed reeds together with cords of twisted palm fiber. Strength alone was useless here. Technique was key. His first true test of integrated skill came not from a flood, but from a drought. The rains failed. The sun became a hammer on bronze, cracking the earth. The river shrank to a tepid trickle. The people of Gwyddina grew desperate, their eyes turning to their strange guardian with a new, hungry hope. "Can you bring rain, Stormbringer?" asked, his face lined with worry. Ur-Ningishzida looked at the desiccated fields. His nature was to counter excess, to blunt a blow. To summon what was absent was a different faculty. "I am not a god," he said, his speech now more fluid. "I cannot command the rain, but I can seek its path." That night, under a sky cluttered with indifferent stars, he climbed to the highest point in the region, a jagged limestone cliff. He closed his eyes and extended his senses. He could smell the water deep in the earth, a faint, damp thread. He could feel the dry winds from the west, but also a subtle, cooler whisper from the northeast, carrying a ghost of moisture from distant mountains. The air pressure on his skin was a map. He deduced the rain was withheld, trapped behind a wall of stagnant hot air to the north. He returned at dawn. "The rain is there," he told Enlil Bani, pointing northeast. "The wind is asleep. It must be awakened." "How does one awaken the wind?" the old man asked, bewildered. Ningish-Sidda looked at his talons, then at the cliff. "With a song it cannot ignore." He returned to the cliff. He did not sing like Ninhilia. Instead, he planted his eagle feet into the stone, cracked his claws into the rock, and drew a breath that swelled his massive chest. From his lion's throat erupted a sound that was not a roar, but a focused, modulated, and immense call. It was the grating of continental plates, the shriek of a tornado's funnel, the deep pulse of thunder, all woven into a single directional vocalization. He poured his will into it, the protector's plea, the intermediary's demand. He sent the sound vibrating into the atmosphere toward the northeast. He called for hours, until the stone beneath his feet grew warm. The people of Gadina heard it, a terrifying, hopeful hymn echoing across the plain. Then, in the late afternoon, they saw the first cloud, a small white puff on the horizon he had indicated. Then another. A breeze stirred, no longer hot, but cool. It was a subtle shift, but Ningish-Sidda, exhausted, his throat raw, felt it on his face. He had not commanded. He had persuaded. He had reminded the weather of its cycle. The rain that came 2 days later was gentle, a nurturing shower, not a destructive deluge. Us, the people, danced in the falling water. Ningish-Sidda understood his power more fully. He was a keystone in the arch between disaster and survival. He could not create the weather, but he could negotiate with it, influence its timing, its intensity, and, most importantly, prepare the earth and its people for its arrival. He was learning the language of the world, and in doing so, teaching humanity to listen. The city of reeds and kings. Decades flowed like the Tigris, steady and transformative. Gadina, under the unseen vigilance of its guardian, prospered. Its barley grew tall, its children grew strong, and its stories grew wings. Tales of the Stormbringer, the lion-headed guardian of the riverbank, traveled on the lips of traders and fishermen. They reached the ears of a man whose ambition was as vast as the alluvial plain. Enmerkar, priest-king of Uruk, the city of white walls and towering ziggurats. They bore a cylinder seal of authority and an invitation etched on a clay tablet. The great king of Uruk, beloved of Inanna, he who orders the land, requests the presence of the being known as Ugallu. His strength is needed for a work worthy of the gods, the raising of the great temple Eanna, the house of heaven. Come and be honored. Enlilbani, now white-haired and bent like an old root, read the tablet with Ninhilia, a woman grown with children of her own, by his side. "It is not a request," he murmured to Ur-Ningish-Zida, who stood in the twilight, a statue of shadow and latent power. "To refuse a king is to invite his army. But to go, Uruk is a world of stone and will, not reeds and community. They will see a tool, not a guardian." Ur-Ningish-Zida's amber eyes glowed in the dim light. He remembered the feel of dry earth, the joy of rain, the simple act of saving grain. But he also felt the pull of the wider world. His purpose was protection. Could that purpose be applied to the raising of a house for the gods? Was a temple not, in its essence, a shelter for the human spirit? "I will go," his voice resonated, deeper now, weathered by years of storm winds. A protector must understand what he protects. "I will see this Uruk." The journey downriver was a passage through a changing Mesopotamia. The solitary reed huts gave way to clustered villages, then to fortified towns. The air grew thick with new scents, the tang of smelted copper, the pungency of dye vats, the dense aroma of thousands of humans living in close quarters. Finally, Uruk rose from the plain, a vision that stole even Ur-Ningish-Zida's breath. Its walls, built of kiln-fired brick, shone bone-white under the sun. Above them, the massive stepped bulk of the ziggurat under construction dominated the skyline. A mountain made by men, a ramp toward the divine. The city's noise was a physical force. The clatter of chisels, the shouts of foremen, the chants of laborers, the bleating of market sheep. People froze as he walked through the massive gate of the bull, flanked by royal guards whose spears trembled despite their discipline. The fear here was different from Gwedina's initial terror. It was laced with awe, with calculation, with religious dread. They saw a walking omen. Enmerkar received him in a courtyard shaded by tamarisk trees. The king was a man of sharp angles and intense eyes, his beard curled with meticulous precision. He did not flinch. He assessed. "So, the stories are true. A child of the storm, given the shape of a guardian Lamashtu." He used the word for a protective spirit, but his tone placed it somewhere between a weapon and a marvel. "Your strength is legendary. The largest bricks for the highest tier of Iana resist my oxen. They stall. They fail. You will carry them." It was not a request. Ur-Ningish-Zida felt the king's will, a force comparable to a high-pressure front. "I carry to build, not to boast," the Ugallu stated. "Then build," Enmerkar smiled, a thin curve of the lips. The worksite was a controlled chaos. Hundreds of laborers moved in lines, hauling mud, weaving baskets, mixing mortar. The ramp leading to the ziggurat's apex was a treacherous slope of packed earth and timber. At its base lay the monstrous bricks, each the size of a small boat, made from the finest clay and straw. Ur-Ningish-Zida approached the first brick. The foremen and workers scurried back, creating a wide circle. He knelt, sinking his talons into the earth for stability. He slid his arms under the brick, his muscles corded and rippling. With a deep, grinding exhale, he lifted. The weight was immense, a test even for him. He took his first step up the ramp. The timber creaked alarmingly. He adjusted his gait, distributing his weight with the precision he'd learned carrying grain sacks. His eagle feet, terrifying to behold, became his greatest asset. They gripped the wooden runners, preventing slip. Step by deliberate step, he ascended. The city spread out below him, a geometric dream of human ambition. The wind whipped at his mane. He was not just carrying a brick, he was carrying the concentrated labor of 100 men, the hope of a king, the prayer of a city. He reached the top, where priests anointed the brick with sacred oil before it was set. The chief mason, a grizzled man with hands like stone, gave a slow, respectful nod. No words were needed. Day after day, he performed this ritual. The people's fear began to morph into something else. They saw his unwavering focus, his lack of malice. They began calling him Ugallu, a familiar, almost affectionate shortening of Ugallu. Children would chant, "Ugallu comes, the brick hums." Yet Ningishzida felt a growing isolation. In Gwydidia, he was part of the life he protected. Here, he was apart, a singular force applied to a singular task. He was becoming a legend, and legends, he was learning, are lonely things. One evening, as he rested by the riverbank inside the city walls, a figure approached. It was a young apprentice scribe, his fingers stained with ink, his eyes bright with intellect rather than fear. He placed a small offering of dates and cheese on a clean reed mat. "Great Ugallu," the scribe began, his voice respectful, "the king's annals will say the strength of the Ugallu built Eanna. But I wish to write a truer story. Why do you do this?" Ningishzida looked at the young man, then at the towering, incomplete temple, its silhouette black against the star-strewn sky. "A single reed breaks in the wind," he rumbled, "but many reeds, bound together, can make a wall, a house, even a city. I am a reed of a different kind, but I am part of the binding. This temple, it is a basket for your people's faith. I help carry the weight of that faith, so it does not crush those who hold it." The scribe, whose name was Shulgi, though he would not become king for many generations, took out his stylus and a small wax tablet. He did not write. He listened. And for the first time in Uruk, Ningishzida felt seen not as a phenomenon, but as a being with a purpose. It was a fragile connection, a single reed in the wind, but it was a start. The guardian had entered the world of kings and history, and he had begun to understand that his greatest challenge would not be lifting stones, but navigating the human heart. The whisper in the dust storm. Years folded into the fabric of Uruk. The great ziggurat of Eanna was completed, its pinnacle scraping the belly of the clouds. Ningishzida's role evolved from mere laborer to a specialized guardian. During the violent sandstorms that blew in from the western desert, he would stand atop the city walls, his body a breakwater against the stinging, suffocating fury. He would channel the worst of the winds away from the granaries and the residential quarters, his very presence creating a pocket of calm. He became Uruk's living talisman, his form stylized and etched onto foundation stones beneath temple corners, a sworn protector against the chaos of the elements. Yet, a deep-seated restlessness grew within him. The city's politics were a labyrinth of whispered intrigues and shifting alliances. Enmerkar's successor, the king Lugalbanda, viewed him with cold pragmatism, a useful asset to be deployed. The priesthood, initially wary, now sought to claim him as an avatar of Adad, a controllable symbol of divine power. They offered him a shrine in the temple district, a gilded cage of incense and ritual. Erningishzida refused. His place was on the walls, in the fields, at the river's edge, where the threat met the people. This independence bred silent resentment. He was too powerful to command, too alien to trust completely. It was during the dry, parching season of Shahur, when the heat haze danced over the plains, that the whisper came. A dust devil, smaller than a man, spun erratically across the barren field east of the city walls. It was not natural. Its core held a faint, phosphorescent glow, a sickly green against the ochre dust. As it passed a stand of dead tamarisks, the tree's bark blackened and split with a sound like cracking bones. Erningishzida, sensing a wrongness in the air's electric balance, tracked it. The dust devil did not behave like wind. It moved with a predatory intent, seeking out life to wither. He intercepted it near an irrigation canal that had run dry. Planting his feet, he drew a breath and unleashed a short, sharp bark of sound, a sonic pulse derived from his storm call, but focused and concussive. The dust devil shuddered and dissipated, but from the settling dust a voice emerged. It was not a sound heard with ears, but a vibration felt in the teeth and marrow, a series of clicks and hisses that resolved into meaning within his mind. "Brother," it sighed, "flesh of the storm, do you not tire of being their wall, their useful beast?" Erningishzida remained utterly still, every sense extended. "What are you?" "What you could be, unbound." The voice seemed to come from the earth itself. "We are kin, forged in anger, not in pity. My father is not Adad, who weeps for mortals. My father is Pazuzu, who brings the burning wind, the fevered breath. I am Gidlu, the scourge that crawls." A vision, sharp and invasive, pierced Erningishzida's mind. A creature of similar base design, humanoid, powerful, but with the head of a feral desert hound, its body covered in locust-like chitin, its feet the skittering claws of a scorpion. It moved through a blighted landscape, not mitigating storms, but cultivating them, twisting gentle rains into acid mists, guiding locust swarms to green fields. "They fear you still," Gidlu's mental voice whispered, oily and persuasive. "They give you offerings from trembling hands. They write your name on stones to trap your essence. They use you. Join me. We are the true children of this world's fury. Let us not guard their nests. Let us cleanse them. Revulsion, hot and immediate, flooded Ningisida. But beneath it, a sliver of the whispered truth resonated. He was feared. He was used. The isolation was a constant ache. My purpose is protection, he growled aloud, his voice shaking the settling dust. A purpose given, not chosen, Ugallu hissed, the voice fading, pulling away. You are a slave to a god's whim. I am free in my father's wrath. When the great drought comes, and it will, for I am shaping it, they will curse your name for failing them. Seek me then in the salt flats where the water dies. We shall speak of freedom, brother. The presence vanished. The air returned to its dead hot stillness. But the land where the dust devil had died was blighted. The brittle grass had turned to ash, and the clay soil had vitrified into a sharp, glassy slag. Ningisida stood amidst the desolation, his heart a drum of conflict. The words were poison, but they found cracks in his resolve. For the first time, he questioned the foundation of his being. Was he merely a tool? Was his compassion just a programmed echo of Adad's momentary regret? The encounter left a stain on his spirit deeper than any physical scar. He reported the blight to Lugalbanda's magistrates, speaking only of a corrupted wind. He did not mention Ugallu. The priests performed rituals of purification, but the glassy patch remained, a permanent testament to the encounter. That night, atop the wall, he looked not outward for threats, but inward. The stars, usually a map of constant wonder, seemed cold and distant. Ninhalia's granddaughter, a little girl who brought him fig cakes, approached without fear. She saw his solemnness. "Ugallu is sad?" she asked. He looked at her, a tiny, vulnerable life trusting in his protection. Her innocence was the antithesis of Ugallu's cynical hatred. "The world has more shadows than I knew, little reed." "But you stand in the light on the wall," she said simply. "The shadows are down there." She pointed to the city streets below. Her childish wisdom struck him with the force of a revelation. His place was not in the shadows of doubt or the false freedom of destruction. His place was here, in the light of duty, on the wall between the darkness and the vulnerable. Ugallu was wrong. His purpose was not a chain. It was a covenant. It was chosen every day he stood his post. The whisper had sought to corrupt him, but instead it had forged his resolve into something harder, more conscious. He was not just Adad's creation, he was Ningisida, the guardian. And he now knew a new facet of his duty: to protect humanity not only from natural disaster, but from the malevolent intelligences that walked within them. The storm outside was simple. The storm within, sparked by a brother's whisper, was the true tempest to be weathered. The bond of forged bronze. The whisper of Ugallu festered in the land before it faded from Ur-Ningish-Zeta's daily thoughts. A tangible blight followed the psychic one. The rains failed, not just over Uruk, but across the southern plain. The river levels sank, revealing cracked, crazed mudflats that stank of dying fish. The heat was a smothering blanket. Whispers among the people turned from concern to fear, then to a low, hungry rumble of discontent. They looked to their king, to their gods, and to their stone-bound protector. Ugallu, his brow perpetually furrowed, convened the high priests and diviners. Sheep were sacrificed, their livers red under the pitiless sun. The omens were dire. The anger of Enlil, lord of wind, the chief diviner intoned, his voice cracking. The great gods withhold their breath. A purification is needed. Ur-Ningish-Zeta, listening from the periphery of the sacred precinct, felt the wrongness. This drought did not have the feel of divine abandonment. It felt targeted. The air was dead, but beneath the stillness he could sense a subtle, malignant pulling, a siphoning of atmospheric moisture towards the east, towards the desolate salt flats Ugallu had named. This was not Enlil's wrath. This was theft. He confronted the council, his bulk casting a long shadow across the sacrificial altar. The water is not withheld, it is stolen, drawn east by a corruption. He chose the word carefully. Ugallu's eyes narrowed. A corruption? You speak of demons, Ugallu? Our rituals cleanse spiritual filth. This filth has claws and purpose, Ur-Ningish-Zeta countered, his tail lashing once. Your rituals are whispers against a hurricane. Send scouts to the eastern salt flats, you will find the source. Skepticism hung thick in the air. A priest of Enlil scoffed. Should we trust the word of a beast over the liver of a sacred ram? A new voice cut through, clear and sharp like a bronze blade. We should trust the word of the one who stands between us and the storm, whose senses are born of the storm itself. All turned. The speaker was a woman. Not a priestess in ornate robes, but a figure in practical, travel-stained leather, her hair braided tightly against her head. She wore a sword at her hip, its hilt wrapped in worn cord. This was Belesa, captain of Ugallu's frontier guard, a warrior whose reputation was built on tracking bandits and rogue lions across the most unforgiving terrain. Her face was all planes and angles, weathered by sun and wind, and her eyes held the steady, assessing gaze of a hunter. Captain Belesa, Ugallu said, his tone wary. Your counsel is of war and border, not of divine matters. This is a border matter, my king, she replied, her gaze never leaving Ur-Ningish-Zeta. A sickness in the land. If the Ugallu says its source lies east, I believe him. I have seen his kind work. I have seen the calm he carves from chaos. I will lead a scout party. An alliance was born in that sun-baked courtyard, not from friendship, but from mutual respect for evidence over dogma. Ugallu, desperate, gave a curt nod. The journey east was a march into a forge. The greenland gave way to scrub, then to barren stone, and finally to the blinding white expanse of the salt flats, a cracked, glittering hell under the sun. Ningishida moved with a predatory grace Balesa had never seen in man or beast. He found water where there seemed to be none, tapping into hidden, bitter aquifers with his talons. He sensed the tremors of distant creatures long before they appeared. At night, he would stand watch, his silhouette against the stars, a comfort to the hardened soldiers who began to see him not as a monster, but as the ultimate sentinel. Balesa approached him on the third night. She sat nearby, honing her bronze blade with a smooth stone. "You do not eat with us," she stated, not a question. "The sun's anger, the dry wind, they feed something in me. Alayhi salam, your bread feeds you." She tested the edge of her blade. "This brother you spoke of to the king, Gidlo, you fear him?" "I fear his purpose. I do not fear his strength." "Good." She sheathed her sword. "Fear clouds judgment. I have fought men, beasts, and the land itself. I have never fought a demon. Tell me of its ways." So he did. He described the mental whisper, the blight, the vision of the locust scorpion form. He spoke of its philosophy of cleansing fury. Balesa listened, her strategist's mind mapping the information. "It is a predator of a scale," she concluded. "It hunts not individuals, but civilizations. It uses the weather like a hunter uses a blind. We are the prey. To fight it, we must be more than prey. We must be the unexpected variable, the trap within the trap." Her words sparked a new way of thinking in him. His methods were reactive, protective. Hers were proactive, tactical. He was the shield, she was the spear held behind it. On the fifth day, they found the source. At the heart of the salt flats was a depression, a bowl of unnatural deep shadow despite the noon sun. In its center stood Gidlu. The vision had been accurate but insufficient to convey its horror. The chitinous plates oozed a viscous, dark fluid. The scorpion claws clicked on the salt crust. Around him, 4 small, sickly dust devils spun, sucking the last traces of moisture from the air and funneling it into a shimmering, distorted vortex above his head, a reservoir of stolen rain. "You came, brother," the voice screeched in their minds, causing the soldiers to clutch their heads. "And you brought lambs to the slaughter. Your loyalty is touching and stupid." "Release the water, Gidlu," Ningishida commanded, stepping forward, his body crackling with static. "Or what? You will protect them? Watch." Gidlu gestured. One of the dust devils shot toward Balesa's squad. Ningishida moved to intercept, but Balesa was faster. She barked an order. Her soldiers, trained by her, didn't flee. They pulled out small, polished bronze shields from their packs, not for war, but for this. They angled them, reflecting the brutal sunlight directly into the core of the approaching dust devil. The concentrated beam of light, magnified by the polished bronze, disrupted the vortex's cohesion. The dust devil faltered, stumbling like a blinded thing. It was a simple, brilliant tactic, using the enemy's chosen weapon, the relentless sun, against it. "Now," Balesa shouted. Ningishzida understood. While Gidlu was distracted by the failure, the Ugallu charged not at the demon, but at the ground near the edge of the depression. He drove his eagle talons deep into the salt crust, then heaved. With a sound like tearing parchment, a massive slab of salt and hardpan rock fractured upward, cutting directly through the path of two other dust devils and severing their connection to Gidlu's central vortex. The stolen reservoir above Gidlu shimmered violently. Without the constant feeding, it became unstable. Ningishzida tilted his head back and roared, not a call for rain, but a shout of pure disruptive force aimed at the vortex. The stolen storm exploded. It did not release gentle rain. It unleashed a torrent of hot, salty, acidic water straight down onto Gidlu. The demon screamed, a physical sound this time, as the corrosive downpour scoured his chitin and dissolved the salt around him into a sucking, briny mire. "This is not over, Guardian," Gidlu's voice shrieked, fading as he seemed to melt into the chaotic muck. "My father's lineage is long. We are the cure you refuse to be." He was gone. The oppressive, moisture-sucking pull vanished. The air, for the first time in weeks, felt neutral, ready to receive its natural weather. Exhausted, Ningishzida stood in the settling haze. Balesa walked up, her face smudged with salt and sweat. She looked at the devastated ground, then at him. "A good tactic," she said. "Using the enemy's weapon. I'll remember that." He looked at her, this human who had met him not with superstition or fear, but with the pragmatism of a fellow soldier. "You fought a demon today, Captain." She grinned, a fierce, white flash in her dirty face. "No, I fought a pest. You fought the demon. We just provided the distraction." She offered him a water skin. He took it, the gesture echoing the one from Enlil Bani a lifetime ago. This bond was different, forged not in gratitude, but in shared resolve and tactical trust. It was the bond of forged bronze, hard, durable, and essential for the battles he now knew were to come. The war for balance had truly begun, and he was no longer fighting it alone. The weight of the crown. Victory over Gidlu was a whisper in the wind, not a lasting peace. The stolen moisture, released in that violent downpour, seeped into the parched earth of the salt flats and did nothing to slake the thirst of Uruk's fields. The return journey was somber. While the malignant pull was gone, the great drought, once triggered, had its own momentum. The city they returned to was a place of grim endurance. Its once vibrant canals, now dusty graves for rotting fish. Its people's eyes hollow with hunger and a growing, desperate anger. King Lugalbanda died shortly after their report. Some said from the strain of the drought. Others whispered from a poison of despair. His son, a young man of 22 named Dumuzi, took the throne.
Dumuzi was not a warrior like his father, nor a builder like Enmerkar. He was a poet, a shepherd of words, with a gentle heart ill-suited to the calculus of famine. He saw Ur-Ningish-Zida not a tool or a weapon, but a living myth, a tragic hero bound to a cruel destiny. He would often summon the Ugallu to the palace gardens, now brown and brittle, not to give orders, but to seek counsel, to ask strange philosophical questions. "Great Ugallu," Dumuzi asked one evening, the setting sun painting the sky the color of dried blood, "you who stand between the fire of heaven and the grass of earth, does the grass thank you, or does it simply grow, unaware of the shield above it?" Ur-Ningish-Zida, his form a dark monolith against the dying light, considered, "Awareness is not required for protection, king. The river does not thank the bank for holding it, but the bank must hold, or the river ceases to be a river. It becomes a flood." Dumuzi sighed, running a hand through his oiled curls. "A flood washes away the old to make way for the new. Is that always evil? Our stores are empty. Our people starve. The old ways, the prayers, the rituals, they fail. Perhaps a flood is needed?" The Ugallu felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. This was not Gidlu's philosophy of cleansing hatred. This was a subtler, more dangerous despair, an intellectual surrender to destruction. "A flood cannot build, king. It can only erase. My purpose is to allow the building to continue." But Dumuzi's poetic despair made him vulnerable to other voices. The priesthood, led by the ambitious high priest Ennugi, saw in the young king's weakness an opportunity. They preached a new, harsh doctrine. The drought was a punishment for impurity, for the city's tolerance of the aberrant, the monstrous. They did not name Ur-Ningish-Zida directly, but their sermons pointedly spoke of mingling the forms decreed by the gods, of allowing the storm's bastard child to walk among the pure. The societal fabric, stretched thin by hunger, began to tear. Where once children had chanted playful rhymes about Ugallu, now they were hushed by fearful parents. Offerings left at the city wall for him were found smashed. Belesa reported increasing skirmishes between her guards, who remained loyal to the crown and held respect for the Ugallu, and temple militia inflamed by Ennugi's rhetoric. The crisis peaked with the festival of the first barley, a ritual meant to beg the goddess Nisaba for a renewal of growth. The barley sprouts, painstakingly nurtured in temple pots with the last of the water reserves, were to be carried in procession. Dumuzi, pressured by Ennugi, decreed that only the pure of form and spirit could bear the sacred pots. This excluded Ur-Ningish-Zida from the ceremony he had, for generations, silently guarded. He watched from his post on the wall as the procession wound through the dusty streets, a pathetic thread of green in a gray world. The priests chanted, their voices brittle. The people's responses were listless, tinged with hopelessness. Then, from a rooftop, a rotten fruit sailed through the air. It missed the priests and struck one of the sacred barley pots, shattering it, scattering the precious green shoots onto the filthy ground. A collective gasp of horror froze the crowd. Then, Inugi's voice cut through the silence, sharp and accusatory. A defilement, an omen. The impurity in our midst invites this sacrilege. Until it is purged, the rains will not fall. The crowd's hungry, desperate gaze turned us one, not toward the unseen fruit thrower, but upward, toward the massive, lion-headed silhouette on the wall. A murmur grew, ugly and guttural. "Send it away!" someone shouted. "It brings the drought!" cried another. Ningish-Caesar felt the weight of their collective fear and blame like a physical pressure. This was a new kind of storm, one he could not deflect with his body or his roar. He looked down and met Dumuzi's eyes. The young king's face was a mask of conflict, trapped between his personal gratitude and the roaring demands of his people. In that moment, Dumuzi looked away. The decision was made for him, not by decree, but by the violent will of the mob. A stone, then another, arced toward the wall. They clattered harmlessly against the bricks below him, but their meaning was unmistakable. He was no longer the guardian. He was the scapegoat. Belisar and her guards formed a tense cordon at the base of the wall, holding back the encroaching crowd. She looked up at him, her expression tight with fury and frustration. She gave a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Not here, not now." Ningish-Caesar understood. His presence was now the spark to the tinder. To protect the city, he had to leave it. The realization was a desolation far deeper than any salt flat. He had failed, not by being too weak, but by being too present, too different, too convenient a target for a suffering he could not single-handedly end. Without a sound, he turned his back on the city he had served for generations. He leapt from the wall, not into the city, but outward, over the heads of the mob, his talons skimming the dry moat before he landed in a run, a blur of speed and power, heading east, away from Uruk, away from the only home he had known for a century. The gasps of the crowd faded into the rustle of the dry wind. He ran until the white walls were a smudge on the horizon, until the ache in his limbs matched the one in his spirit. He stopped in the dead heart of a long-abandoned irrigation plain. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rasp of his breath. He had faced lightning, sandstorms, and the whispers of a demon brother.
But this betrayal, this expulsion, born of human fear and priestly manipulation, was a poison for which he had no antidote. He tilted his head back, but no roar emerged. Only a long, low, shuddering exhalation, a sigh that held the weight of a crumbling world. The guardian was now an exile, and the weight of the crown he had never sought to wear, the crown of blame, was the heaviest he had ever borne. The Wanderer's Road. Exile was a new kind of existence. Without a wall to stand upon, a people to watch over, Ningish-Caesar's purpose drifted like dust on the wind. He became a ghost in the hinterlands of Mesopotamia, a figure glimpsed at twilight by nomadic shepherds who crossed themselves and hurried their flocks along. He traveled the margins,
the rugged foothills of the Zagros Mountains, the desolate edges of the southern marshes, the silent ruins of cities long swallowed by sand. He survived by becoming a perfect reflection of the wild. He learned to hunt not for sport, but for necessity, his lion's instincts merging with his intellect to bring down oryx and wild ass with silent, terrifying efficiency. He drank from mountain springs so cold they made his teeth ache, and from brackish marsh pools he purified by stirring them with a charged talon, separating the water from the silt with a crackle of ozone. He slept in caves, his body heat warding off the desert chill, his ears tuned to the language of the night, the yip of foxes, the distant rumble of slides in the mountains, the sigh of the ceaseless wind. This life was simple, elemental, and utterly devoid of meaning. He was a force, alone. The years blurred. He saw human settlements from afar, their cook fires tiny pinpricks of life in the vast darkness. He felt the echoes of their joys and sorrows, their storms and droughts, but he remained apart. The wound of Uruk's rejection was a scar that never fully closed. It was in the highlands, near a place later men would call Elam, that he found evidence he was not the only one of his kind. In a narrow canyon scoured by ancient floods, he discovered a pictograph etched into a sheltered rock face. The style was crude, older than the cuneiform of the plains. It depicted a figure with the head of a bird of prey and the feet of a bull, standing between a wave and a group of stick-figure humans. Beneath it was another, a creature with a serpent's head and human hands, holding what looked like a star. They were protectors. Other Ugallu. Other children of desperate gods, perhaps from different pantheons, different times. A profound loneliness swelled within him, followed by a flicker of something else. A sense of lineage, of a scattered brotherhood of guardians. He also found darker echoes. In a cave blackened by ancient soot, he found bones, human but strangely elongated, fused in ways no natural skeleton should be. They were arranged in a circle, and in the center was a crude clay figurine, broken but clearly resembling a creature with a canine head and scorpion claws. Gidlu's influence, or that of his father Pazuzu, stretched far. The war was not confined to the Sumerian plain. It was a silent, sporadic conflict waged across the ages and the geography of the world. His wanderings eventually led him south, skirting the bitter waters of the lower sea. The air grew thick and humid. He entered the vast reed beds and shifting waterways of the southern marshes, a labyrinthine world of green and blue, teeming with life. Here, the people lived not in cities of brick, but on floating islands of woven reeds, in houses built of the same material. They were the Mashufa, the marsh dwellers, a people who read the water's mood like others read the sky. They saw him first, a boy, fishing from a small canoe, looked up to see the lion-headed giant standing knee-deep in the lagoon, watching a heron take flight. The boy did not scream. He blinked, his eyes wide with wonder, not fear. He called out in a lilting dialect, "Anamunus? Are you a spirit?" Ningjazida, his voice rusty from disuse, replied in the Sumerian tongue, "I am a traveler. The boy paddled closer, fearless. You have a lion's face. Lions are for the dry lands. You are far from home, traveler. The simplicity of the statement, devoid of judgment, was a balm. I am, the Ugallu acknowledged. The boy, whose name was Atu, became his guide. The Mashufa, isolated and attuned to the delicate balance of their ecosystem, held no preconceived dogmas about demons or sanctioned gods. They judged by action. They saw Ningzida calm a sudden choppy squall by simply raising a hand and emitting a low harmonic hum. They saw him use his talons to swiftly weave and reinforce a collapsing section of a floating walkway during a flood. They saw him stand for hours, motionless, diverting the attention of a swarm of biting flies away from a birthing hut. To them, he was not Ugallu or Urgolu.
They called him Lugal Idigna, the king of the river, a title of respect for a powerful, benevolent force of nature. They offered him fish roasted in clay and sweet dates, and in return he helped them. He taught them to read the subtle electrical changes in the air before a lightning storm, so they could lower their reed spikes. He showed them how to construct fish weirs that withstood stronger currents. For the first time since Gadina, he was not a symbol, a tool, or an exile. He was a member of a community, valued for what he could do, not feared for what he was. He learned their songs, the complex, watery melodies sung from canoe to canoe. He sat with their elders, who spoke not of cosmic wars, but of the patterns of frog spawn, the migration of birds, the salinity of the water. One evening, as the sun set the marsh on fire with oranges and purples, the elder, a woman named Ninti, with hands like gnarled roots, spoke to him. Lugal Idigna, you carry a storm inside you. Not the storm of the sky, but the storm of memory. It weighs your steps. He told her. He spoke of Uruk, of the drought, of the stone's thrown, of the king who looked away. He spoke of Gidlu. The words, locked inside for decades, flowed out like a released river. Ninti listened, her eyes reflecting the dying light. A city is a hungry thing, she said softly. It consumes food, water, loyalty. It demands stories that are simple. You were a complex story. In the marsh, we understand complexity. Everything is connected. The reed, the fish, the bird, the water. You are part of that connection. Here, you are not a weapon or a demon. You are a strand in the weave. Perhaps you were not meant for walls of brick, Lugal Idigna. Perhaps you were meant for the living, breathing walls of the world itself. Her wisdom settled over him, quiet and profound. The exile's road had led him not to oblivion, but to a deeper understanding of his nature. He was a guardian, yes, but a guardian's place was not always on a fortress wall. It could be here, in the soft, resilient heart of the marsh, protecting a different kind of harmony. The wound of Uruk began finally to heal, not by forgiving, but by being recontextualized. He had a home again, not a city, but a purpose reframed. He was Lugal Idigna, and his kingdom was the balance of things. Yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, the pictograph of the other Ugallu
and the broken figurine of Gidlu's kin whispered that his road, while changed, was far from over. The clay tablet and the bronze dagger. Peace in the marshes was a cyclical, not a permanent state. Ningishazida, Lugal Idiga to his new people, found rhythm in the wet and dry seasons, in the breeding of birds and the running of fish. He was a myth made mundane, a cherished oddity. Years passed in the humid embrace of the reeds. Atu, the curious boy, grew into a strong young man, a skilled hunter and canoe-maker. The bond between them was one of deep, unspoken kinship, a bridge between the primal and the human. This fragile equilibrium shattered with the arrival of the soldiers. They came on flat-bottomed barges, 20 men clad in the leather and bronze of Uruk, but their demeanor was not that of Belesa's disciplined guard. These men had the hollow-eyed look of veterans from a losing war, their uniforms frayed, their weapons notched. At their head was not a royal captain, but a priestly adjutant, wearing the scarab emblem of Enki, god of water and wisdom. His name was Sagil, and his eyes held a fervent, calculating light. They beached their barges at the main Mashufa village. Ninti and the elders met them, their postures wary. Sagil announced his purpose without ceremony, his Sumerian tongue harsh and formal compared to the marsh dwellers' fluid dialect. By the authority of the Lugal of Uruk and the temple of Angur, we seek the entity known as Ningishazida, the Ugallu. He is summoned to the city of under the auspices of King Namu and the high priestess of Nana. A ripple of unease went through the Mashufa. Was a rising power to the west, a city vying with a diminished Uruk for dominance. Ninti stepped forward. The king of the river dwells here in peace. He answers no summons from kings of brick. Sagil's smile was thin. Peace? The world beyond your reeds bleeds, old mother. The great drought you evaded here was but a prelude. Unnatural storms plague the land. Blighted winds wither crops from to Nippur. The priests of all cities have divined the cause. A war among the storm spirits. The Ugallu's knowledge is required. His presence is demanded. He held out a clay tablet sealed with the distinctive seal of a moon disk atop a sacred barge. This is not a request from a frightened mob. This is a formal plea from the wielders of me, the divine decrees of civilization. Ningishzida emerged from the curtain of reeds, having heard every word. His appearance caused the soldiers to grip their weapons, but Sagil only looked intrigued, like a scholar presented with a rare text. The Ugallu had changed. His mane was threaded with green marsh vines. His skin carried the patina of sun and water. He looked less like a carved demon and more like an ancient spirit of the land itself. He took the tablet. His thick fingers traced the cuneiform wedges, reading the formal, elegant script. It spoke of calamities born of conflicting divine wills, of the need for a mediator versed in the language of chaos, and offered not a cage, but a seat at the council of survival. It was signed by Ur-Nammu, a king renowned as a lawgiver and unifier, and by the high priestess Enheduanna, a name even the marsh dwellers knew as a poet and powerful voice of the moon god Nana. "The stones of Uruk are still in my memory, priest," Ur-Ningishzida rumbled, his voice carrying the depth of the marsh. Sagil nodded. "Uruk is a shadow. Ur-Nammu builds for the future. He builds justice into the very walls of his city. He knows a tool of balance when he sees one. This is not about fear. It is about utility. A precise tool for a precise problem." The word tool grated, but the tablet's words resonated. A counsel, a mediator. Was this the higher purpose Ninti had hinted at? To move from guarding a village or a city to advising the very structure of order? Atu moved to his side, his face etched with worry. "Do not go, Lugallidigna. Their words are smooth, but their eyes are hard. They see a thing to be used." Ninti placed a withered hand on Ur-Ningishzida's forearm. "The marsh will always be your haven, but a river must flow. If your path leads to go, but carry the marsh with you. Remember the weave." The decision was a turning point more profound than his exile. Exile was a reaction. This was a choice. He would go to not as a fugitive or a monster, but as a summoned expert. He would take the wisdom of the marsh, the interconnected, resilient, subtle wisdom, into the heart of imperial power. The journey to was a passage through a wounded land. They traveled west from the marshes into the alluvial plain. The evidence of the unnatural storms was everywhere. They passed a field where the wheat stood blackened and brittle, as if flash-frozen, then burned. A village where the mud brick houses were pocked with holes, as if rained upon by stones of ice. The air in these places tasted metallic, wrong, vibrating with a residual energy that made his mane stir and his talons itch. It was not Gidlu's work. This was more chaotic, less focused. It felt like the aftermath of a clash. When it appeared, was a statement in baked brick. Its might was not in sprawling walls like Uruk, but in concentrated, awe-inspiring monumentality. The great ziggurat of Nana, a massive, smooth-sided mountain of gleaming blue-glazed brick and white plaster, dominated the sky. Everything radiated order, precision, and a confident imperial grace. He was taken not to a palace dungeon, but to a spacious, airy chamber within the temple complex, with a view of the sacred precinct. Here he waited. His first visitor was not the king, but the high priestess. Enheduanna entered alone, a woman of middle years, her hair covered by an elaborate silver circlet, her robes simple but of the finest linen. Her eyes were the most striking feature, deep, intelligent, and weary, holding the weight of celestial observations and earthly politics.
She did not bow, nor did she show fear. She sat opposite him, placing a bronze dagger on the low table between them, its blade pointed toward herself, a ritual gesture of non-aggression. Ningish Zida, she said, her voice melodic yet firm. I have written hymns to Inanna that speak of her wearing the tablet of destinies like a necklace, ordering the cosmos. I sense you are a living punctuation mark in that text. Tell me of the storm that is not a storm. Tell me of the war we cannot see. For hours he spoke. He told her of Gidlu, of Pazuzu's lineage of corruption, of the subtle theft of weather, of the pictographs of other Ugallu, of the broken figurine in the cave. He spoke not just as a witness, but as a theoretician of chaos, using metaphors of the marsh, a sickened root spoiling the whole plant, a poisoned tributary affecting the great river. Enheduanna listened, her fingers occasionally tracing the cuneiform on a wax tablet she carried. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. "The tablet of destinies," she murmured finally. "It is not a metaphor. It is an artifact, a celestial focus. The lore says it was stolen once, and the world fell into imbalance. The conflicting storms, they feel like a fraying at the edges of that order. You are proposing that entities like your brother are symptoms of that fraying. Or perhaps," she met his gaze, "they are attempting to steal a thread of that power for themselves, to rewrite a small part of the tablet." Her insight was staggering. It placed his personal struggle within a cosmic framework. The clay tablet of Namu had summoned him for a political crisis. The bronze dagger of Enheduanna revealed a theological war. "Why summon me?" he asked. "You have armies, priests, rituals." "We have rituals for known gods," she said, picking up the dagger, turning it over so the point now lay neutral on the table. "For Enlil's righteous storm, for Adad's fertilizing rain. We have no rituals for the bastards of chaos. You are the ritual, Ningish Zida. You are the living ceremony of balance. Namu wants to use you to calm the land for his empire. I need you to help me understand what is breaking in heaven so we can mend it on earth." The duality was clear. He stood between the clay tablet of imperial utility and the bronze dagger of sacred insight. His purpose in would be a delicate, dangerous dance between king and priestess, between the immediate need for stability and the long-term need for cosmic repair. He was no longer just a protector of people, but a potential keystone in the arch of creation itself. The marsh had taught him the weave. Now he had to see if he could repair a tear in the very fabric of that weave, with the fate of cities and perhaps the order of the world in his taloned hands. The moon Zibbarat and the shattered sky. Life in was a structured paradox. Ningish Zida was accorded a status somewhere between revered oracle and prized hunting hound. He had quarters, not a cage. He had attendants who served him with a mixture of terror and fascination. His days were split between the demands of the king and the inquiries of the high priestess. King Namu was a man of granite resolve.
His vision was a Mesopotamia united under the just laws he had inscribed on stone stelae. The unnatural storms were a threat to that vision, unraveling the agricultural surplus that fueled his armies and public works. He required practical solutions. He would have Ningishzida taken to the site of a recent blight wind. The Ugallu would stand in the center of the devastation, his senses extended, reading the residual energy like a physician reading a fever. It tastes of contradiction, Ningishzida reported after one such visit to a frozen orchard. The cold of the high air, but the rage of the desert fire. Two spirits wrestling, their struggle spilled onto the earth. Can you track them, find their source, and disperse them? Namu asked, his fingers drumming on the map tablet in his strategy room. I am a mediator, not an assassin, King. To kill one might unbalance the system further, leaving a vacuum for something worse. They must be separated, calmed. Namu's lips thinned. He wanted a military solution to a spiritual problem. Then find where they clash next. Position yourself. Intervene. Be the wall between them. That is your function, is it not? Meanwhile, in the quiet scriptorium of the ziggurat, Enheduanna's approach was scholastic and profound. She had her scribes compile every fragment of text mentioning storm demons, bastard winds, or the children of forgotten angers. She cross-referenced these with astronomical observations, the phases of the moon, the movements of planets. She theorized that the weakening of certain celestial alignments, perhaps due to the metaphorical fraying of the tablet of destinies, was creating apertures for these chaotic entities to breach the ordered world. Your brother, Gidlu, she posited one evening, the oil lamp casting long shadows on the scroll-laden walls. He spoke of his father, Pazuzu. The texts say Pazuzu was himself created to counter the demoness Lamashtu, a weapon that gained sentience. This suggests a lineage of reactive entities, each generation further from the original divine will, more twisted, more independent. You are unique. You were created not in reactive anger, but in proactive compassion. A flawed, divine compassion, but compassion nonetheless. You may be the only one of your kind who can reason, not just react. Her words gave him a new sense of identity. He was not an accident. He was an experiment in benevolent intervention. This knowledge was both empowering and a burden. The crisis escalated. The clashes grew more frequent, more violent. A hail of burning sulfur fell on a suburb of setting reed roofs aflame. A localized tornado, filled with grit that cut like knives, scoured a field outside Nippur. The people's panic, once a distant rumor, was now at the gates of itself. Namu's patience frayed. Enheduanna's divinations grew more urgent. It was she who pinpointed the next and likely greatest convergence. Her calculations, based on lunar movements and the erratic energy patterns Ningishzida had described, predicted a cataclysmic clash directly over the Gulf, near the sacred city of Eridu, the oldest of all Sumerian cities, the home of Enki. The clash would happen on the night of the new moon, when the sky was darkest and celestial protections were deemed weakest. It will be more than two spirits, Enheduanna warned, her face pale. The alignment is a nexus. I fear it will be a cascade, a rupture. Namu mobilized. He ordered Ningishzida to travel to Eridu with a contingent of his best soldiers and a cohort of junior priests. His orders were clear. End the threat, by whatever means necessary. Enheduanna gave him a different charge. She pressed a small clay cylinder seal into his hand.
It was etched with the symbol of Nana, the moon god, a calming, measuring force. Do not seek to destroy, seek to re-inscribe. Remember the weave, use the logic of the balance. You are the living stylus tonight. Write a word of order into the chaos. The journey to Eridu was a silent, forced march. The coastal air grew thick and charged, humming with a sub-audible tension that set everyone's teeth on edge. The ancient city, built on dunes near the fresh waters of the estuary, seemed to hold its breath. They arrived at dusk. The new moon was a mere absence, a black hole in a sky strangely devoid of stars. Ningishzida climbed the tallest temple platform in Eridu, a ruined ziggurat dedicated to Enki. He sent the soldiers and priests to the outskirts. This was not a fight for mortal men. He stood alone at the apex, the salt wind whipping his mane. He closed his eyes and opened his senses fully. He felt them coming, not two, but many. Vibrations in the fabric of the air. Gidlu's familiar corrosive signature was there, a petty opportunist swimming in the wake of greater powers. But there were others, a shrieking presence that was pure desiccating heat, a moaning entity of unnatural drowning cold, a chittering, frenetic storm of locust minds. They were drawn to the weakness in the firmament above Eridu like vultures to a wound. The sky did not cloud. It shattered. Above him, the blackness rippled, then tore. It was not a physical tear, but a perceptual one. Through it, he saw a swirling, neon-colored maelstrom, the raw stuff of chaotic weather, the unformed potential before the gods decreed rain or wind. The entities poured through the tear, colliding, merging, fighting for dominance over the unleashed energies. The result on Earth was instantaneous and apocalyptic. To the north, the air burst into flames without fuel. To the south, a wall of ice crystals razor-sharp materialized and shot horizontally, shredding the palm trees. A whirlwind of salt water and sand formed over the gulf, moving toward the city. The very laws of nature were being rewritten in a cacophony of conflicting wills. Ningishzida knew then that Namu's way was impossible. He could not fight this. Enheduanna was right. He had to re-inscribe.
He planted his talons on the temple stone, feeling the ancient prayers within it. He drew breath, not to roar, but to sing.
He poured every lesson into the sound, the protective stability of the riverbank from Gedina, the tactical focus from Belessa, the interconnected resilience of the marsh from Ninti, the cosmic order from Enheduanna. He sang a note of pure, unwavering balance. The sound was not loud, it was profound. It vibrated through the stone, through the air, through the very ley lines of the earth. It was a tuning fork struck against the discord. The chaotic entities shrieked in dissonance. The note was an agony to them, a demand for form they refused to accept. But it also created a resonance. Within the maelstrom of the tear, he sensed a deeper, older pattern. The ghost of the original divine order of storms, the template from the tablet of destinies. He focused his will, using the moon seal symbolism as a lens. He did not attack the entities. He began to weave. With his song as a shuttle, he took a thread of the scorching heat and crossed it with a thread of the drowning cold, creating a template for a gentle, warm rain. He took the frenetic locust energy and braided it with the stable earth resonance of the temple, creating a pattern for a soft, steady wind. He was not commanding, he was reminding. He was showing the chaos what it could be, what it was meant to be, offering it a more stable, sustainable form. One by one, the weaker entities, exhausted by their own conflict, latched on to these offered patterns. They dissipated, their energy bleeding away into harmless, normal atmospheric processes. The scorching heat became a warm breeze. The drowning cold became a morning dew. But Ugallu and the two most powerful entities, the heat demon and the cold wraith, resisted. They turned from fighting each other to fighting him. They coalesced their fury into a single, focused beam of annihilating contradiction, a spear of absolute zero sheathed in solar fire, aimed directly at his heart on the ziggurat. Ningishzida saw that coming. He knew he could not stop it and maintain his weaving song. He had a choice: defend himself and let the tapestry unravel, or complete the pattern and accept the strike. He thought of the weave, of Atu's trusting face, of Enheduanna's weary, hopeful eyes. He sang louder, pouring the last of his essence into the final, stabilizing knot of the pattern. The beam struck. Light swallowed the world. On the outskirts, the soldiers and priests were thrown to the ground. A sound like a mountain breaking filled the universe. Then, silence. A soft, normal, nurturing rain began to fall over Eridu. When they dared to approach the ziggurat at dawn, they found the platform scarred with a strange, glassy crater. In the center, slumped but not fallen, was Ningishzida. His form was cracked like old pottery. Fissures of muted light shone from within his body. His lion's head was bowed, his eyes closed. He was not dead. He was frozen,
a statue of himself, humming with a faint harmonic vibration. Above him, the sky was whole, pale gray with clouds, weeping a gentle, healing rain. The tear was mended, the chaos was ordered. He had been the stylus, and in writing order into the sky, he had inscribed the ultimate cost onto his own form. The guardian had not fallen. He had become the monument to his own victory. The monument that breathes. The rain over Eridu fell for 7 days and 7 nights, a gentle, persistent weeping that washed the salt from the soil and the fear from the air. The unnatural storms ceased across the land. Word spread, carried by traders and priests, of the great sacrifice atop the old ziggurat. The being called Ugallu was not dead, but transformed. He had become the Sikilu, the pure, silent one, a living statue humming with contained power. King Ur-Nammu, ever pragmatic, declared a state holiday and commissioned a stele to be erected at the site, detailing the victory of divine order over chaos. His inscription credited the wisdom of the gods of Ur and the strength of the king's own will, mentioning the storm creature as a loyal instrument who had fulfilled its function. Ur-Ningishzita's fate was framed as a noble end, a tool retired with honor after its final greatest use. High Priestess Enheduanna saw far more. She traveled to Eridu herself, a journey of solemn pilgrimage. She stood before the cracked, luminous form on the platform. The gentle hum resonated in her bones, a song too deep for human ears. She placed her hand not on the stone-like skin, but on the air before him, feeling the intricate lattice of stabilized energy he had woven and now maintained. In that moment, she did not compose a hymn of victory, but a lament of understanding. Her poem, later titled The Exaltation of the Silent Guardian, wove together theology and personal empathy. She wrote of him as the stylus of a Dodd's remorse, the living knot in the unraveling rope of heaven, who swallowed the scream of the shattered sky so the world could hear the rain. She postulated that his state was not an end, but a perpetual act. He was holding the repaired weave in place, a psychic keystone in the arch of the firmament. His silence was the deepest form of speech, his stillness the most dynamic form of action. The site became a place of pilgrimage, but not like the bustling temples of Ur or Uruk. It was a place of quiet awe. Fishermen would leave a portion of their first catch at the base of the ziggurat. Farmers would bring husks of the first barley. They would sit in the rain or sun, not praying to him, but simply being near him, as if his harmonic presence could bless their own struggles for balance. He was no longer a demon, a tool, or even a hero. He was a fact of the world, a geographical feature of the spirit, like a mountain that hummed. Years layered upon years. Ur-Nammu died, succeeded by his son Shulgi. Enheduanna passed into legend, her hymns copied and recopied. The marsh dwellers, led by an aging Atu, would make annual journeys, cleaning the platform of debris, singing the watery songs of the marsh to their silent Lugal Idigna. They believed he could hear. And, in a way, he could. Ur-Ningishzita's consciousness had not vanished. It had expanded and retracted simultaneously. He was acutely aware of the specific point of reality he was holding stable, the healed scar over Eridu. He could feel the pressure of the chaotic void on the other side, the constant, insistent push of formlessness. His will was the dam. His focused intent was the only thing preventing a new tear. But his awareness also bled into the environment. He felt the roots of lichen slowly covering his feet. He sensed the nesting swallows in the cracks of the ziggurat, their heartbeats tiny, rapid drums against the backdrop of his hum. He tasted the salt on the wind, the sweetness of date pollen, the metallic tinge of distant storms that were now blessedly normal. He could follow the life threads of those who visited, the weary farmer's arthritic pain, the young lover's hopeful tremor, the old priest's scholarly doubt. He was a node in the web of life, feeling every vibration along the strands. Time lost its linear grip. Decades were like breaths. He witnessed the slow silting of the Eridu estuary, the growth and decline of villages on the horizon.
He saw Shulgi's empire rise, its messengers passing on the royal road below. He felt the tremors of distant wars, the collective fear like a sour taste in the rain. Then a new vibration, familiar, oily, and hatefully patient. It did not approach Eridu directly. It moved through the world of men, a whispering corruption in the courts and temples. Ugallu had survived, weakened perhaps, but uncowed. The great mending had forced entities like him into dormancy, but it had not erased them. And Ugallu had learned. Direct assault on the firmament had failed. Now he would attack the reeve from within, by corrupting the very civilizations that thrived under its order. Ningishzida, in his silent vigil, perceived Ugallu's new strategy not as a vision, but as a pattern of poison in the flow of human events. He felt it in the rise of a particularly cruel and superstitious governor in a nearby city, whose edicts mirrored Ugallu's philosophy of cleansing. He sensed it in a series of profane rituals performed in abandoned places, designed not to honor gods, but to weaken the moral and spiritual fabric that, Enheduanna had theorized, was the earthly reflection of the cosmic tablet. If the reflection became too distorted, the original might crack again. He was the guardian, but he was fixed, a lighthouse that could not chase the storm. A profound frustration, the first sharp emotion he'd felt since the mending, stirred within his petrified core. He could see the termites in the foundation, but could not raise a hand to crush them. His answer came not from within, but from without. A young man, perhaps 18 years old, climbed the ziggurat one evening. He was not a farmer or a fisherman. He wore the simple, dusty robe of an itinerant scholar. He carried a worn leather satchel filled with wax tablets. His name was Iltani, and he was a student of the old texts, obsessed with the period of the great storms and the figure of the Ugallu. He had read Enheduanna's hymn 1,000 times. He did not come to leave an offering. He came to listen. For days, Iltani sat cross-legged before the silent form. He meditated,
He copied the strange, faint symbols that seemed to glow and fade within the cracks of the creature's skin, the physical manifestation of the woven pattern. He charted the exact pitch and frequency of the hum using a primitive monochord instrument of stretched gut string. One night, under a fat gibbous moon, Iltani spoke, his voice soft but fervent.
They say you are silent, but Enheduanna wrote that you speak in the language of held breath and rooted stone. I have been listening. I hear the pattern. It is a formula, a mathematical prayer. He unrolled a scroll on which he had transcribed the symbols and frequencies. This sequence here, he pointed, it correlates to the priestly hymns for calming the east wind. This harmonic cluster, it matches the architectural ratios of the oldest, most stable temples. You are not just holding a tear, great guardian. You are broadcasting a song of stability, a template. Ningishzita's consciousness focused on the young man with an intensity he hadn't used in a century. Yes, the thought was not a word, but a pulse in the harmonic field, a slight, almost imperceptible brightening of the cracks near Iltani. Iltani gasped, staring. You heard? You understand? Another pulse. Yes. Tears welled in the young scholar's eyes. It was not fear, but the profound joy of connection, of validation. I have studied the reports from the time of the wars, the corruption. It returns, not in the sky, but in the hearts of men. It twists laws. It promotes cruelty. It seeks to make the world a reflection of chaos, so chaos may find an open door. Yes, the hum deepened momentarily, resonating with Iltani's own anxiety. I am but one man with clay tablets and a monochord, Iltani whispered, despair creeping in. Then an idea formed, not in Iltani's mind, but in the shared space between his intellect and Ningishzita's vast, anchored consciousness. It was an image, a concept conveyed through emotion and symbolic resonance. The pattern, the template. It did not need to be held only by one being in one place. It could be taught. It could be replicated in a diminished form by those with the wisdom to understand. Iltani's eyes widened. The song, the weaving pattern. You can't leave your post. But could I learn it? Not to mend the sky, but to mend a broken law? To calm a hateful heart? To be a small human knot in a small human unraveling? The response was a warm, sustained wave of affirmation that flowed through Iltani, filling him with a sense of purpose so clear it was dizzying. The monument was not just a thing to be revered. It was a teacher. Its vigil was not passive. It was a continuous instruction, waiting for a student to read its text. From that night, Iltani became the first listener. He spent years at the base of the ziggurat, decoding the silent broadcast. He learned to hum fragments of the stability song. He used the geometric principles in the pattern to design simple, harmonious buildings that seemed to foster peace. He used the ethical ratios implied in the harmonics to counsel local judges. He was not a magician. He was a practitioner of applied balance. And he began to teach others.
A small, secretive, but potent school grew around the silent guardian, the Order of the Held Breath. They were scribes, architects, healers, and judges who learned to listen to the world with the same attentive patience Iltani had learned, to sense the small tears in the social and moral fabric, and to apply the principles of the cosmic weave to mend them. Ningishzida, the Sekillu, had found a new way to protect. He was the root, the source pattern. His listeners were the branches, carrying his influence into the world he could no longer walk. Gidlu's corruption would now meet a subtle, distributed resistance. A human resistance guided by the silent song of a storm demon who had become the Earth's own steady heartbeat. The Guardian's purpose had evolved once more, from wall to exile to teacher, and his legacy would be written not in stone, but in the actions of those who learned to hear the music of the balance he maintained. The listeners and the corrupted seal. Centuries are grains of sand in the hourglass of a living monument. For Ningishzida, anchored in his eternal vigil, the passage of time was measured in the slow dance of erosion and the changing tenor of the human heartbeats that echoed in his sanctum. The Order of the Held Breath, founded by Iltani, became his hands and feet in the world. They were a diffuse network, never centralized. Their membership a secret passed from master to disciple. A potter in Nippur might shape her vessels to resonant proportions that soothed household strife. A judge in Essen might hum a specific harmonic under his breath before delivering a verdict, finding the words for justice rather than vengeance. They were subtle weavers, fighting Gidlu's insidious corrosion not with swords, but with symmetry, song, and psychological insight. Iltani lived a long life, dying peacefully as an old man at the foot of the ziggurat, his hand resting on stone warm from the guardian's hum. His successor was a woman named Nindana, a temple archivist with an eidetic memory for patterns. She formalized the teachings into 3 core disciplines: the cadence, sonic and rhythmic harmony; the proportion, geometric and architectural balance; and the intent, the cultivation of a calm, mediating will. The order thrived in the shadows of the Essen-Larsa period, a quiet counterpoint to the era's famed wars and poetic laments. But Gidlu, patient as desert stone, adapted. He could not assault the firmament directly, nor could he easily corrupt those trained to hear the guardian's stabilizing song. So he turned his malice to the very symbols of order the listeners revered. His influence seeped into the heart of a decadent, declining Larsa. He found a vessel, a brilliant but nihilistic royal seal cutter named Kurgal. Kurgal was an artist of immense talent, whose seals were prized for their intricate, almost hypnotic beauty. He was also a man hollowed by loss, viewing the world as a cruel, meaningless joke. Gidlu's whisper found fertile ground. "You carve the lies of kings," the voice slithered into Kurgal's dreams. "Might, lineage, divine favor, all fictions to mask the chaos. Carve a truth for me. Carve the real power." Ugallu provided the design. It was a perversion of the sacred ring and rope motif that symbolized the measuring of the cosmos by the gods.
In Kurgal's skilled hands, it became a twisted braid of scorpion tails and locust legs, encircling a void that seemed to suck the light from the clay. This was no mere decoration. It was a sigil, a focal point for entropy. Ugallu taught Kurgal a formula of specific, abrasive minerals to mix into the clay, and a series of angular, dissonant chants to recite while the seal was fired. The sigil of the uncoiling was born. When pressed into wet clay tablets, decrees, tax records, marriage contracts, it did not merely leave an impression, it left a psychic stain. Documents sealed with it fostered paranoia, exacerbated greed, and seeded irrational conflict. A simple boundary dispute would spiral into a blood feud. A trade agreement would breed accusations of cheating where none existed. It was corruption at the molecular level of society, a slow poison in the administrative bloodstream. The listeners felt the disturbance. Reports came to Nindana in Eridu. A treaty between and Larsa collapsed overnight, though the terms were fair, a messenger whispered. The governor of Kazalu has begun taxing the air his subjects breathe, citing a clause in a tablet that everyone swears wasn't there before. The tablet bears a strange seal. It hurts the eyes to look at. Nindana, now an elderly woman with eyes like chips of obsidian, ascended the ziggurat. She did not need to speak aloud to the guardian. Decades of communion had attuned her. She placed her palms on the sun-warmed stone beside his fissured foot and opened her mind, presenting the problem. The sigil, its effects, its feel. The response from Ningishsida was not an idea, but a sensation, a memory of taste. The metallic, wrong tang of the blighted salt flat where he had first confronted Ugallu. And alongside it, a counter-frequency, a specific harmonic sequence from the great weaving song that had targeted and neutralized that same corrosive essence. It was a signature, an antidote in the form of a vibration. Nindana understood. The order had to become diagnosticians and physicians. They needed to find the poisoned tablets and, more importantly, craft a counterseal. This task fell to a young, brilliant listener named Puzur Ishtar. He was a master of the proportion, an architect who could feel stress in a structure before a crack appeared. Assigned to the royal workshops of Isin, he used his position to study a captured uncoiling seal impression. Just looking at the design made his stomach turn, and his thoughts spiral toward his own deepest insecurities. He had to use cadence techniques, humming the core stability tone, just to examine it. His breakthrough came not from grand insight, but from meticulous observation. He noticed that the negative space within the twisted braid of the sigil, the void, had a specific, aggressive shape. It was not random. It was a predatory geometric form. Using the principles of the proportion, Puzur Ishtar designed a counterform. His seal would feature the knot of Enki,
a complex, interlocked pattern representing the god of wisdom and fresh water, a symbol of benevolent, binding order. Within the interstices of the knot, he carved micro-patterns that were the physical analogues of the antidote harmonic Nindana had received. Creating the clay for the counterseal was an alchemical ritual of intent. Puzar Ishtar mixed the clay with powdered limestone from Eridu, carrying the guardian's resonance, lapis lazuli for celestial connection, and a drop of his own blood, symbolizing the human will to heal. As he shaped it, a chorus of listeners stationed around the workshop chanted the antidote frequency, their voices layering into a powerful, focused beam of sonic order. The firing was done in a kiln previously cleansed with cedar smoke and blessings. The resulting seal, when pressed into clay, did not just leave a mark. It emitted a faint, soothing warmth. When pressed over an existing sigil of the uncoiling, a remarkable thing happened. The hostile geometry of Gidlu's design seemed to vibrate, then blur, as if its lines were unraveling. The psychic stain dissipated, not with a bang, but with a sigh. The document remained, but its hidden poison was neutralized. The war entered a new, clandestine phase. Kurgal, guided by Gidlu, crafted new variations of the sigil. Puzur Ishtar and his fellow listeners raced to develop corresponding counterseals. It was a shadow conflict fought in royal archives, merchant houses, and legal chambers. A listener might serve as a scribe, accidentally spilling water on a poisonous tablet, requiring a fresh copy to be made and sealed with the proper purifying seal. Another might be a priest, discovering an omen that required all administrative tablets in a city to be reconsecrated, a massive undertaking that allowed listeners to replace corrupted seals in mass. Kurgal eventually grew afraid.
The whispers in his head grew angrier, more demanding. He saw his beautiful, terrible creations being nullified by seals of quiet, stubborn harmony. In a fit of paranoia, he tried to destroy his own workshop. The resulting fire killed him and melted his master's sigils, but not before Gidlu's influence had jumped to a new, more powerful host, a warlord named Sinidinum, who saw in the sigil's power a weapon to shatter his enemy's cohesion before battle. The conflict escalated from parchment to the battlefield. Sin-Idinum's armies carried standards embossed with the uncoiling sigil. Their mere presence could cause disarray in enemy ranks, fostering mutiny and cowardice. The listeners had no armies, but they had Puzur Ishtar's final greatest work, the standard of the held breath. It was a large bronze disc inscribed with a magnificent spiraling knot of Enki, its grooves filled with silver and electrum. When raised on a pole and struck gently with a specially tuned mallet, it would ring with the pure, amplified tone of the guardian's core stability frequency. At the Battle of the Two Canals, the forces of Isin, led by a king advised by listeners, faced Sinidinum's horde. As the corrupted standards advanced, spreading panic, the standard of the held breath was unveiled and struck. A clear, profound note rang out, visible as a ripple in the dusty air. It did not harm the soldiers. It clarified. The gnawing fear, the irrational hatred, the sudden distrust of comrades. It lifted like a morning fog.
Sinidinum's army, deprived of its psychic weapon, faltered. The battle was won by conventional means, but the victory belonged to the silent song from Eridu. Ugallu was thwarted again, but the listeners knew the victory was fragile. Their enemy was a spirit of adaptation. They had protected the administrative and military realms, but the Guardian's lesson was clear. The weave must be defended everywhere. As the centuries turned, the order would embed itself deeper into medicine, music, and the very education of the elite. Ningishzida, the silent teacher, had guided his students through their first great test. The war for balance was now a perpetual underground campaign, fought with seals, symbols, and the unyielding power of harmonious intent. The Babylonian lathe. The world shifted on its axis. The political gravity of Mesopotamia slid north, drawn toward the dynamism of a new city on the Euphrates, Babylon. Its kings spoke not just of power, but of destiny. They sought to unify land, gods, and people under a single, overwhelming system. For the listeners, this posed an unprecedented dilemma. The principle of monolithic order was inherently at odds with their doctrine of subtle, distributed balance. A single, perfect system had no give, no flexibility. It could only shatter or suffocate. Ningishzida, in his timeless vigil, felt the change in the psychic weather. The human currents flowing past Eridu carried a new vibration, ambition vast and cold as a glacier. It was the energy of the Babylonian lathe, a force seeking to turn the diverse clay of Mesopotamian cultures into identical, polished bricks for a single, towering edifice. The architect of this vision was King Hammurabi. His famous law code was the ultimate expression of this will to order. It was brilliant, comprehensive, and rigid. For the listeners, it was a double-edged sword. Many of its laws promoted justice and fairness, principles harmonious with their intent. Yet its utter certainty, its lack of ambiguity, its substitution of fixed statute for situational wisdom felt like a different kind of weave, a too tight, constricting mesh that might eventually choke the life it sought to regulate. The order was divided. A faction, led by a listener named Rimush, argued for collaboration. Hammurabi's order is a bulwark against chaos, he proclaimed in a secret conclave held in the catacombs beneath a Babylonian temple. His laws suppress the petty corruptions Ugallu thrives on. We should advise the scribes, ensure the code's administration is tempered with cadence and proportion. We can be the soul within the machine. The opposing faction, led by Nindana's great-grand disciple, Bao-Alsu, saw catastrophe. He builds not a wall, but a coffin, she countered, her voice sharp. His order admits no deviation. What of the marsh dwellers' custom, the highlanders' tradition? The Guardian's weave is organic, adaptable. Hammurabi's is carved in diorite. To merge with it is to betray our core principle. We must remain in the shadows, mending the small tears his rigidity will inevitably cause. The debate raged for years, a microcosm of the tension gripping the land. Ur-Ningishzida could not guide them to a single answer, for the question itself was the essence of the balance. When does order become oppression?
His silent broadcast offered only the principle of dynamic equilibrium, which both sides claimed to uphold. The crisis crystallized around a single, infamous law in Hammurabi's code, Law 196. If a man destroy the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye. The principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye. To Rimush's faction, this was ultimate balance, a precise restoration of equilibrium through equal measure. To Bawalsu's, it was a brutal parody of balance, ignoring intent, circumstance, and the possibility of restoration without mutilation. Gidlu, ever the opportunist, saw his opening. He could not corrupt the law itself, etched in unyielding stone, but he could corrupt its application. He poured his influence into the heart of a young, zealous Babylonian magistrate named Nur-Sin, a devotee of the code who saw the world in stark, binary terms. Nur-Sin's judgments became cruelly literal, his court a theater of precise, horrific symmetry. A farmer who accidentally caused a neighbor's ox to drown through a breached canal? The farmer's prime ox was confiscated and ritually drowned. A child who threw a stone in play, blinding another. The child was blinded. The law was followed to the letter, but justice and harmony fled. The listeners were horrified. Rimush's faction, serving within the bureaucracy, tried to soften the interpretations, to introduce notions of accident and restitution. They were rebuffed as corrupters of the pure law. Bawalsu's faction worked from outside, using cadence to soothe victims' families, using proportion to design public works that fostered community healing around these tragedies, trying to repair the social fabric torn by the law's stricture. Ur-Ningishzida felt each of these events as a sharp, discordant ping against the stable field he maintained. Nur-Sin's perverse rulings were like small, localized inversions of the balance principle, a dark mirror of his own purpose. The guardian's frustration grew. He was the master weaver, but he could not intervene in the interpretation of a legal text. The answer came, as it often did, through an individual who stood at the nexus. A young woman named Iltani, named for the first listener, was a junior scribe in Nur-Sin's court. She was also a secretly trained adept of the intent. Daily, she was forced to inscribe tablets recording these brutal judgments. Each stroke of her stylus felt like a violation. She sought guidance at the Eridu ziggurat, pouring out her despair to the silent form. What she received was not a directive, but a pattern of thought. A memory of the marsh, of Ninti's wisdom. The river does not thank the bank for holding it, but the bank must hold, or the river ceases to be a river. The law was the bank, but a river that never overflowed was a dead canal.
A bank that never eroded was a prison wall. True balance required both channel and floodplain. Iltani returned to Babylon with a dangerous idea. She could not change the law, but she could change the record. Not the verdict, but the context. When inscribing the tablet for the child who blinded another, she did not merely write the verdict. In the detailed case summary section, a usually dry recitation of facts, she employed all her skill. She described the children's laughter before the throw, the mother's wail that was like a bird whose nest has fallen, the blinding not as a mere fact, but as a sundering of the light of two houses. She wrote with such poignant, heartbreaking proportion that the tablet became not just a legal record, but a tragic poem. These empathetic summaries began to circulate among the scribal class, then to junior priests, then to the wives of officials. They caused a quiet stir. The stark, brutal verdicts, when framed within the full human context Iltani provided, seemed suddenly monstrous, even to those who revered the code. A pressure built within Babylonian society, a moral unease. Nur-Sin, sensing this shift, grew furious. He accused Iltani of imbuing the king's words with unauthorized sentiment, a crime akin to forgery. She was arrested. Her trial was to be a spectacle, a reaffirmation of the code's absolute, unfeeling authority. In her cell, Iltani practiced the cadence. She hummed the stability tone, not for herself, but for the city. On the day of her trial, as she stood before Nur-Sin and a packed courtyard, she did not defend herself against the charges. Instead, when asked for her final statement, she began to sing. It was not a song of words, but the pure, clear, antidote harmonic she had learned from the listeners, the very frequency that neutralized Ugallu's corruption. The note, sung with the focused intent of a true adept, cut through the atmosphere of rigid judgment. It did not change minds through argument. It created a moment of profound, collective pause. In that silence, the human cost encoded in all of Iltani's empathetic summaries seemed to hang in the air, tangible and undeniable. Nur-Sin, his face purple with rage, ordered her silenced. But before the guards could move, an older, respected judge, a man who had received one of Iltani's tablets, stood. "Enough," he said, his voice weary. "The law is a measuring rope, but even a rope must have a little give, or it will snap when pulled too tight. The scribe Iltani has not corrupted the law. She has reminded us what the law is for." Iltani was not acquitted, but her punishment was commuted to exile. More importantly, a precedent was set. From then on, Babylonian legal tablets often contained more nuanced summaries. The principle of lex talionis began to be interpreted with increasing latitude, considering intent and circumstance. The Babylonian lathe had met the resilient reed. Ugallu's attempt to weaponize rigid order had been blunted. The listeners learned a vital lesson. They could not fight a monolithic system head-on, but they could insinuate humanity into its interstices, soften its edges with empathy, and use its own records to argue for mercy. Ningishzita's vigil had once again provided the principle, the need for both channel and floodplain, and a brave human had found the way to apply it. The Guardian's legacy was no longer just about stopping storms. It was about preventing the human heart from turning to stone under the weight of its own perfect, terrible laws. The Library of Ashurbanipal. The Babylonian lathe gave way to the Assyrian anvil. The world grew louder, harder, more violent. The Assyrian kings were masters of calculated terror, their empire a sprawling engine of conquest and extraction. From his fixed point in Eridu, Ningishzita perceived this new age as a drumbeat of marching feet and the silent screams of razed cities, vibrations carried through the very bones of the earth. The listeners, now calling themselves the tenders of the quiet pattern, were forced into deeper secrecy. Their work became one of salvage and preservation, protecting pockets of harmony in a world drunk on the wine of power. Their greatest patron and greatest challenge arose in the form of the last great Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal. Unlike his warrior forebears, Ashurbanipal's obsession was not merely territory, but knowledge. He conceived a project of staggering ambition, to gather every single written work in the known world into one place, the library of all knowledge in his capital, Nineveh. He sent agents to every city, temple, and scholar's house, demanding tablets, scrolls, and inscriptions. It was an act of intellectual imperialism to match the military kind. For the tenders, this was a cataclysm in slow motion. The library was not evil in intent, but its method, the centralization of all wisdom, the removal of texts from their native contexts, the subjection of every idea to the cataloging system of a single absolute power, was the ultimate expression of the monolithic order they feared. It was the Babylonian lathe applied to thought itself. Worse, they knew that among the thousands of tablets being collected were their own most sacred texts. Copies of Enheduanna's Exaltation, Iltani's empathetic summaries, the technical scrolls of Puzur-Ishtar on counterseals, and the core disciplines of cadence, proportion, and intent. To have these secrets housed in Nineveh was to put them in the belly of the beast. The chief tender of this era was a man named Nabu-Zeru-Ibni, a master archivist from the ancient city of Ashur. He understood the power and the peril of the library better than anyone. He was recruited by Ashurbanipal's scholars for his expertise. This placed him in a position of terrifying duality. He was both a preserver of knowledge for the empire and a guardian of secrets against it. From Eridu, the silent guardian's guidance was a constant, subtle pressure on Nabu-Zeru-Ibni's mind, a reminder of the weave. The principle now was dispersion within concentration. They could not stop the library, but they could influence what went into it, and, more importantly, they could ensure the living knowledge, the oral traditions, the practiced skills remained elsewhere. Nabu-Zeru-Ibni's work became a masterpiece of scholarly subversion. When a royal agent arrived at a temple known to house tender texts, Nabu-Zeru would already be there, assisting with the cataloging. He would ensure the most sensitive scrolls were accidentally listed as duplicates of common hymns or mundane economic records. He would create beautifully copied but subtly altered versions of key texts. In a scroll on the proportion, he might change a crucial ratio by a fraction, rendering any structure built from it aesthetically pleasing but spiritually inert.
In a text of the cadence, he might transpose a sequence of harmonics, turning a healing tone into a mere pleasant melody. The originals, or truer copies, were smuggled out via a network of traders, riverfolk, and marsh dwellers, Atu's descendants still loyal to Lugaligna. They were hidden in clay jars buried beneath the floors of remote way stations, sealed in waterproof chests and sunk in the deep reeds of the southern marshes, committed to the flawless memories of itinerant tender storytellers. But Ashurbanipal was no fool. He had a secret police, the king's eyes, who grew suspicious of incoming collections. Their captain, a ruthlessly intelligent man named Sennacherib No, grandson of the destroyer king, focused on Nabu-Zeru Ibni. He sensed the archivist was a filter, not a funnel. The confrontation came in the bowels of the still-growing library, a cavernous hall smelling of clay, ink, and cedar oil. Sennacherib No confronted Nabu-Zeru Ibni, holding two tablets. One was a tender text on the intent from Babylon, the other a seemingly identical copy from Uruk. The phrasing in paragraph 7, Sennacherib No said, his voice a low hiss. The Babylonian copy speaks of the will us a flowing river. The Uruk copy says the will us a guiding canal. A small difference. But which is the true wisdom, archivist? Or is truth something you decide for the king? Nabu-Zeru Ibni remained calm, calling upon a lifetime of intent training. Truth, Captain, is often a matter of context. A river and a canal are both water. One is wild, one is shaped. The library seeks to be the canal. But can a canal hold the sea? Do not philosophize with me, Sennacherib No sneered. I think you are part of a heresy, a cult that believes balance is higher than the king's command. You are poisoning the well of knowledge. I am tending the garden from which the well springs, Nabu-Zeru Ibni replied. Uproot every plant to bring it inside, and you have a bouquet that will die in a vase. The garden must remain. That night, knowing his time was short, Nabu-Zeru Ibni performed his greatest act of dispersal. He had identified the single most dangerous item in the collection for the tenders, a pristine original cylinder seal, believed to be the very standard of the held breath created by Pazur Ishtar centuries before. In the wrong hands, its resonant properties could be reverse-engineered, its harmony twisted into a weapon of mass control. It was due to be catalogued the next day. Alone in the library, by the light of a single oil lamp, Nabu-Zeru Ibni did not steal it. He altered it.
Using a fine diamond-tipped drill, he performed micro-engraving on the reverse of the bronze disc, following a pattern received during a deep meditation at Eridu. It was a silencing knot, a pattern of such perfect, closed harmony that it would absorb and nullify any vibration attempted through the seal's front. He then anointed it with a rare oil that would oxidize quickly, making the new engraving look like ancient natural tarnish. His work was discovered by Sennacherib No just as he finished. There was no dramatic chase. The captain and his men surrounded him in the silent hall of tablets. "You see," Sennacherib No said, picking up the altered seal, "you deface the king's property for your cult." Nabu-Zeru-Ibni smiled, a serene expression that unnerved his captor. "I have not defaced it. I have completed it. Now it is truly a standard of held breath. It will hold its own song forever, safe from those who would misuse it. The garden is preserved, Captain. You have the vase. We have the seeds." He was executed at dawn, but his mission was accomplished. The library amassed its mountains of clay, a magnificent, static monument to a dying empire's hunger for control. But the living heart of the tender's knowledge, the adaptable, contextual, practiced wisdom, remained dispersed, alive in hidden jars, sung in quiet rituals, and practiced in forgotten marshes. Years later, when the Medes and Babylonians besieged and burned Nineveh, the great library's tablets were not all destroyed. The fire baked them, preserving them for millennia. Archaeologists would one day find them and marvel. Among them, they would find the corrupted tender texts and the silenced seal, puzzles within puzzles. And Ur-Ningishzida, feeling the distant collapse of the Assyrian engine, perceived a great, releasing sigh in the land. The oppressive, centralized pressure lifted. The weave, though scarred, had held. His silent lesson had been learned. Do not fight the empire's thirst for knowledge. Outlast it. Let it build its vase of fired clay, while you keep the living water flowing elsewhere. The guardian of balance had become the guardian of diaspora, ensuring that the pattern of harmony could never be fully captured, catalogued, or controlled. The coming of the salt. After the fire of Nineveh, the world entered a long, dry season of the spirit. Great empires fractured into petty kingdoms. The grand unifying visions of Babylon and Assyria gave way to a fragmented, weary landscape. The tenders of the quiet pattern, their network strained but unbroken, continued their work, but the vibrations of human ambition they felt now were smaller, meaner, more desperate. The weave of civilization seemed to be unraveling from fatigue. Ur-Ningishzida's perception, stretched across the centuries, began to detect a deeper, more fundamental shift. It was not a tear in the sky, nor a corruption in law or library. It was a slow, insidious change in the taste of the world itself. The rains, when they came, felt thinner. The floods left not rich, dark silt, but a gray, powdery residue. The river waters carried a new, persistent bitterness. The very earth beneath his fixed talons in Eridu began to whisper a lament of exhaustion. This was not Gidlu's work. This was the consequence of millennia of human effort. Over-irrigation, deforestation, the relentless demand of cities. The land was becoming salinized. The life was leaching out of it. This was a disaster no counterseal could fix, no harmonic could deflect. It was the slow-motion death of the Fertile Crescent itself, the physical foundation upon which all the stories of kings, gods, demons, and guardians had been built. A profound, planetary sorrow seeped into Ningishzita's timeless awareness.
He had held back chaos from above and corruption from within, but he was powerless against the gradual suicide of the soil. The tenders felt it too, in their own ways. Crop yields dwindled. Abandoned villages dotted the plains. The great urban centers like and Uruk shrank, their populations drifting away. The knowledge they had preserved of architecture, law, harmony, began to feel like instructions for a world that was ceasing to exist. In this twilight, a final, unexpected disciple came to the ziggurat at Eridu. He was not a Sumerian, an Akkadian, or an Assyrian. He was a young man from the Kassite Hills, a people who had once ruled Babylon, us outsiders. His name was Harbu, and he was a shepherd. He had led his dwindling flock down from the arid highlands in search of better pasture, following old tales of a singing stone by the sea that could bless the land. When he saw the silent guardian, he did not see a demon or a god. He saw a fellow survivor, something ancient and steadfast in a dying world. He camped at the base of the ziggurat. He shared his meager cheese and flatbread, leaving a portion on a reed mat as he had heard was the old custom. He spoke to the statue not in prayers, but in simple reportage. The grass on the eastern track is gone, burned by the sun and tasting of salt, he would say. The kids are weak. The old ewe died last night. The world is tired, stone being. Ningishzita, whose consciousness had been saturated with the cosmic and the political, found Harbu's grounded, elemental despair uniquely poignant. Here was the end point of all the struggles, a shepherd with hungry sheep on a salinized plain. The guardian had no harmonic to reverse soil death, but he had memory. He had the memory of the marsh, of the resilient, adaptive life that thrived in the margins. He could not speak, but he could project memory. He focused his will, not on the sky, but on the shepherd's humble, practical mind. He sent Harbu a dream, not of glorious cities or cosmic battles, but of the southern marshes. He showed him the buoyant reed islands, the fish teeming in brackish water, the way the Mashufa lived with the water, not fighting it. He showed him the patterns of their woven houses, their fish weirs, their understanding of seasonal floods. It was a vision of adaptation, of finding a new balance in a changed world, rather than clinging to the corpse of the old. Harbu awake at dawn, the taste of marsh air and the image of woven reeds vivid in his mind. He looked at the guardian, and for a flickering moment the cracks in the stone form seemed to pulse with a soft green light. He understood. The old land was dying. The song of the stone was not a call to revive it, but a map to a new harmony. He gathered his small, ragged flock. He did not return to the hills. He turned south, toward the vast, misty reed beds his people had always avoided as a haunted, watery waste. He found the descendants of the Mashufa, now fewer and more insular than ever. At first, they were wary of the hillmen, but Harbu spoke of the singing stone, of Lugal Idigna, and showed an intuitive understanding of water and reeds, a knowledge that seemed gifted, not learned. Slowly he was accepted. He taught the marsh dwellers some hill ways of managing goats on floating platforms. They taught him the ancient arts of the marsh. He became a bridge, a hybrid. He encouraged other scattered, desperate folk from the dying plains to come south to learn the ways of the water. He used the principles of the weave, which he understood in a practical, non-scholarly way. Balance the goats with the fish, the reeds harvested with the reeds growing, the human need with the wetlands' capacity. Ningishzida, watching through the slow stream of time and through the reports of the few tenders who still made pilgrimage, felt a glimmer of something beyond sorrow. This was not preservation, this was transformation. His long vigil had protected the possibility of continuity, and now, at the end of an age, a simple shepherd was enacting it. The legacy of the guardian was not the survival of Sumerian culture, but the survival of the principle of balance, even as the stage upon which it was performed from fertile field to brackish marsh. The great cities emptied. Sand drifted over the ziggurats of Ur and Uruk. Cuneiform was forgotten. The gods Marduk and Ashur faded into myth. The library of Ashurbanipal slept under its mound. The rigid laws turned to cryptic curiosities. But in the marshes, life, adapted and resilient, went on. The songs sung there now held fragments of the old cadence, woven into melodies about flood and tide. The patterns of the fish traps echoed the ancient proportion. The communal decisions of the marsh villages practiced a rough, vital form of intent. Gidlu's influence faded with the civilization that had given him such rich material to corrupt. With no grand temples to profane, no vast administrations to poison, his petty, spiteful energy dissipated, starved of the complex order he hated. He was last sensed as a faint, frustrated whisper in a dust devil blowing over the ruins of Babylon before scattering into the indifferent wind. On his platform in Eridu, now a crumbling, lonely finger of brick pointing at a forgotten sky, Ningishzida felt his work nearing its completion. The immediate threat to the cosmic weave was long mended and stable. The knowledge of balance had been seeded into a new, humbler, more resilient human existence. The salt was coming, but life was finding a way to live with salt. His own form was almost fully mineral now, barely distinguishable from the weathered stone of the ziggurat. The hum was so deep it was more a tectonic patience than a sound. His consciousness began its final gentle contraction. He was ready to become fully what he appeared to be, a monument.
not to a king or a god, but to the idea that between the chaos and the order, between the flood and the drought, between the glory and the ruin, there is a space for guardianship. And that guardianship, once begun, never truly ends. It only changes form. He sent one last wide, tender pulse through the weave, a farewell and a blessing that rippled through the roots of the marsh reeds, through the memories of the last tenders, and through the dreams of a sleeping shepherd named Harbu. It was a single word of feeling, not language. Persist. Then the conscious light within the stone, the focused eye that was Ningish-Zeta, began to gently diffuse, like a drop of ink in the ocean of time. He did not die. He returned. His awareness merged with the slow processes he had protected for so long. The patient erosion of the ziggurat by wind and rain, the gradual northward creep of the seawater, the silent, stubborn growth of lichen on sun-baked brick. The guardian became the landscape. His vigil was over, because he had become the thing he was guarding. The story of the lion-headed, eagle-footed storm demon was ending, not with a climax, but with a seamless blending into the enduring, breathing world. The seed in the sediment. The millennia that followed were a long, slow exhalation. The ruins of Sumer and Akkad were buried under wind-blown silt and the uncaring sand. The great rivers, though diminished, continued their patient meander, carving new channels over forgotten cities. The memory of Ugallu, of Ningish-Zeta, fractured and transformed. In the folklore of the marsh Arabs who were the heirs of the Mashufa and Harbuz people, he became Al-Asad al-Ma, the lion of the water, a protective spirit of the reed beds who could calm sudden squalls. His image, stylized and worn, was sometimes carved onto the prows of their canoes. Among the scattered communities of the plains, his story shrank to a fireside tale of a jinn with a lion's face who helped people during great floods, a story told alongside those of Sinbad and the Queen of Sheba. The profound theology of Enheduanna, the tactical brilliance of Bilessa, the scholarly defiance of Nabu Zeru Ibni, all were lost, their essence surviving only as a vague cultural preference for hospitality, a distrust of absolute power, and a deep, practical knowledge of water management. The stone that had been his body on the ziggurat at Eridu was, over centuries, weathered to a smooth, featureless nub. The harmonic hum faded below the threshold of even the most sensitive listener's perception. The ziggurat itself became a shapeless mound, a tell, known to the few wandering Bedouin as Tel Abu Shahrain, a place of old ghosts and good hunting for desert rodents. The weave he had mended in the sky was stable, a forgotten repair in the fabric of a reality that had moved on. Yet a seed lay dormant in the sediment. The principle of the guardian, the entity that stands in the breach, the mediator between destructive force and fragile life, had been inscribed into the subconscious of the land itself. It was a pattern waiting for a new context. That context arrived not with chariots and cuneiform, but with the hum of propellers and the methodical scrate of trowels. In the 19th and 20th centuries of the Common Era, the outside world rediscovered Mesopotamia. Archaeologists from Europe, wielding maps derived from cryptic biblical and classical references, began to poke at the strange mounds dotting the Iraqi landscape. Among them was a man named Dr. Alastair Finch, a British archaeologist of a rare breed, more poet than imperialist, driven by a desire to hear the voices in the dust, rather than merely bag trophies for the British Museum.
In the winter of 1922, while other teams were uncovering the glitter of Ur's royal tombs, Finch became obsessed with the lonely, less promising mound of Tel Abu Shahrain, ancient Eridu. His foreman, a local Iraqi from Basra named Jaber al-Hassan, tried to dissuade him. "That mound, Effendi, is a place of jinn," Jaber said, stirring the evening campfire. "Old people say a stone there once sang. It is not good to dig up singing stones." But Finch was captivated. His team began their trench on the mound's highest point. The work was slow, revealing layers of mud brick and ashy debris. They found little of obvious value. No gold, no dramatic statues, only endless broken pottery and the occasional clay token. The funding committee grew impatient. Finch, however, felt a strange, persistent atmosphere at the site, a profound silence that felt intentional, not merely empty. One afternoon, as the sun cast long, melancholy shadows, Jaber's trowel struck not brick, but something harder and of a different resonance. Carefully, they cleared the soil. It was a large, strangely shaped stone, partially fused with the surrounding brickwork. It was vaguely humanoid, but utterly abstracted by time, smooth as a river pebble. Yet its position at the very apex of the original structure was deliberate. "This is it," Finch whispered, brushing the stone with a soft brush. "The cult object, the heart of the temple." As the light faded, Finch insisted on staying alone at the trench to make sketches. A strange mood settled over him. The silence deepened, becoming a palpable pressure in his ears. He placed his hand on the warm, smooth stone. He was a rational man, a product of the Enlightenment, but in that moment he felt a wave of emotion so vast and alien it staggered him. A confluence of immense patience, fierce protective resolve, and a sorrow as deep as geological time. It was not a vision, it was an impression, a psychic fossil. He snatched his hand back, gasping. The air felt normal again, but something had been transmitted. That night, in his tent, Finch did not write his usual clinical field notes. Instead, he began to write a story. It poured out of him, a narrative about a creature born of a storm god's compassion, who stood between humanity and disaster. He wrote of its loneliness, its exile, its ultimate sacrifice to mend a broken sky. He had no names, no historical details, but the emotional arc was shockingly complete. He titled it, "The Vigil at the World's Edge." When he published it later as a piece of speculative fiction, it was a modest success among a niche audience. But for Finch, it changed everything. He became an advocate for a different kind of archaeology, one that sought the mythic and emotional truth of a place, not just its artifacts. He argued, controversially,
that sights held a resonant memory that could be intuitively perceived. Jabir, too, was affected. He had watched Finch's reaction. That night, he dreamt of his grandfather speaking of the lion of the water. He began to tell his children the old stories with renewed conviction, weaving in Finch's fictional details as if they had always been there, closing a circle that had been broken for 4,000 years. The seed was sprouting. The story was re-entering the world. A century later, in the early 21st century, a young Iraqi-American digital anthropologist named Laila Al-Hassan, great-granddaughter of Jabir, was compiling oral histories from the remaining marsh communities for her doctoral thesis. She came across Finch's obscure story in an archive. The parallels with the Lion of the Water legends her own family had told were unmistakable. But it was the emotional core that gripped her. The idea of a protector whose very nature was to intervene, to stand in the breach. Her world was one facing a new kind of catastrophic threat: climate change. The delicate marshes, recently reflooded after Saddam's draining, were now threatened by rising sea levels, increased salinity, and devastating droughts. The modern storms were not of divine anger, but of human-made planetary imbalance. The old solutions, dikes, laws, libraries, seemed insufficient. Layla visited Tel Abu Shahirain, now a protected but lonely archaeological site. She stood where Finch had stood, where the stone had been, now in the Baghdad Museum, catalogued as a unique cultic object of unknown significance. The air was quiet, hot, and heavy with the scent of dust and distant diesel. She felt no vision, but she felt a question, one that seemed to rise from the ground itself. What does guardianship look like now? The story of Ningishzida, pieced together from legend, fragmented text, and Finch's intuitive fiction, became her guide. She saw his journey as a blueprint for adaptive resilience. He had been a wall in Gedina, a strategic partner with Beleza, an exile and learner in the marsh, a teacher for the listeners, and finally, a foundational principle in his petrified state. His power was not domination, but negotiation, with storms, with kings, with corruption, and ultimately, with change itself. Lila's thesis evolved into a practical initiative. She founded the Ugallu Project, a non-governmental organization that combined ancient and modern wisdom. It used satellite data to monitor marsh health, modern proportion, employed traditional mashufa weaving techniques to create biodegradable barriers against erosion, ancient proportion, facilitated conflict resolution dialogues between herders, farmers, and oil officials using structured, empathetic communication techniques, modern cadence and intent, and set up storytelling hubs where scientists and elders could share knowledge. The project's logo was a stylized, abstract design based on the museum's sketch of the smooth stone from Eridu. To the outside world, it was a geometric shape. To those who knew, it was a lion's head in profile, merged with the curve of a river and the sweep of an eagle's talon. The project did not save the world, but it created pockets of resilience, of negotiated balance in a region on the brink. It was a humble, human-scale reflection of the old Ugallu's purpose. Lila often felt she was not inventing something new, but remembering something ancient, giving form to a protective principle that had never truly died, only slept in the stone and the story. And in the quiet moments, in the marsh at dusk when the herons flew home, she would sometimes feel it, not a hum, not a voice, but a quality of attention, a sense that the landscape itself was witnessing this small, stubborn effort to maintain the weave. The guardian was gone as a discrete entity, but the function of guardianship, the niche he had carved out in the ecology of existence, remained. It had been passed on, like a seed in the sediment, waiting for the right conditions to sprout again in the minds and actions of those who would listen. The story of Ugallu, therefore, has no true ending. It is a continuum, from the storm-lashed birth of a lion-headed mediator, through the rise and fall of empires, through the long sleep in stone, to a modern woman using his legend to foster balance in an era of new disasters. The thread persists. He became a myth. The myth became a memory. The memory became a question, and the question became a new kind of action. His legacy is not a statue in a museum, but the enduring, evolving idea that in the space between destruction and survival, there is always a need for a guardian. And that guardian, in whatever form it takes for whatever age, will always be, at its heart, a negotiator for life. The narrative arc of Ur-Ningishzida, the singular Ugallu, has reached its conclusion. His journey from conscious, suffering protector to silent, petrified teacher, and finally to dissolved elemental principle is complete. The biopic of his existence, spanning the dawn of cities to the dust of their ruins, has been told. The New Weave. The Sikilu Project's headquarters was a restored mudif, a great arched reed hall in the heart of the restored Chibayish marshes. The air, thick with the scent of wet earth and flowering lemongrass, hummed not with an ancient tone, but with the low chatter of satellite modems, the scratch of styluses on tablets, now of the digital kind, and the melodic debate of elders and engineers. Laila al-Hassan, her hair streaked with premature gray from a decade of diplomatic and environmental battles, surveyed a large holographic projection hovering over the central dirt floor. It displayed the delicate hydrographic map of the marsh ecosystem, overlaid with real-time data on salinity, water temperature, and bird migrations. A pulsing red-tinged zone in the northern sector indicated a rising saline plume from upstream agricultural runoff, a new kind of blight wind. The desalination buffers we wove last season are slowing it, said a young hydrologist, Zara, pointing to a green lattice on the map. But they are not stopping it. The pressure is too great. An elder, Haji Majid, a direct descendant of Harbu's lineage with hands like knotted rope, spoke softly. The reed they used upstream is the foreign kind, fast-growing but thirsty. It drinks the fresh water and leaves the salt behind. It is a selfish reed. We must speak to the farmers of the north, not with laws, but with a better reed. This was the new weave. The Ugallu project's headquarters was a restored mudif, a great arched reed hall in the heart of the restored Chibayish marshes. The air, thick with the scent of wet earth and flowering lemongrass, hummed not with an ancient tone, but with the low chatter of satellite modems, the scratch of styluses on tablets, now of the digital kind, and the melodic debate of elders and engineers. Laila al-Hassan, her hair streaked with premature gray from a decade of diplomatic and environmental battles, surveyed a large holographic projection hovering over the central dirt floor. It displayed the delicate hydrographic map of the marsh ecosystem, overlaid with real-time data on salinity, water temperature, and bird migrations. A pulsing red-tinged zone in the northern sector indicated a rising saline plume from upstream agricultural runoff, a new kind of blight wind. This was the new weave.
Not a single guardian standing against the storm, but a network, a synthesis of spectral analysis and ancestral botany, of conflict mediation and ecological engineering. They were applying cadence to community disputes over water rights, proportion to the design of sustainable fishing gear and housing, and intent to the steadfast, patient work of restoration against overwhelming odds. One evening, after a grueling day negotiating with oil company representatives, Lila walked alone to the edge of the open water. The stars, undimmed by city lights, blazed in the black velvet of the sky, reflecting in the still water so perfectly it seemed the world had doubled. She felt the weight of the seemingly futile struggle, the selfish reeds of the world, the short-term gains, the corrosive politics, the vast, indifferent systems, sometimes felt like a force as inexorable as Ugallu's engineered drought. She found herself whispering, a habit born of stress, directed at no one. What would you do? How do you negotiate with a system that has no mind, only momentum? She expected only the chirp of frogs and the distant call of a bittern in response. But as she stood there, an odd confluence occurred. A cool wind, smelling of distant rain, swept off the water, cutting through the day's residual heat. At the same moment, a data pulse from the project's satellite feed buzzed in her pocket. She pulled out her tablet. The red saline plume on the live map had suddenly developed a unique spiraling pattern at its leading edge, a pattern that matched no known hydrological model. It looked, eerily, like the knot of Enki from the ancient counterseals. Her scientific mind raced for explanations, a sensor glitch, an odd interaction between current and sediment. But her heart, steeped in the story that was her inheritance, knew another truth. It was not an intervention. It was a signature. The land itself, the water, the soil, the collective memory of the reeds and the creatures and the millennia of human struggle encoded in the sediment, was responding. The principle of balance, the Ugallu function that Ningishzida had embodied and then become, was not a supernatural entity. It was a natural law of complex systems, a tendency toward homeostasis, toward resilience. He had been a conscious agent of that law. Now, in this place where his story had begun, and where it was being consciously remembered, the law seemed to be expressing itself with a faint, almost poetic coherence. It was the world saying, "The weave is still here. You are part of it. Keep weaving." Tears, hot and sudden, streamed down Lila's face. It was not a message of salvation. The saline plume would still be a battle. The negotiations would still be brutal. But it was a confirmation of context. She was not a lone woman shouting into the storm. She was a listener in a new age, and the territory she listened to, the living, breathing, remembering land, was listening back. She returned to the Mudif with a transformed resolve. She called the team together. "We've been thinking like a wall against the salt," she said, her voice clear in the lamplight. "We need to think like the marsh. We don't stop the saline water, we negotiate with it. We create channels to divert and dilute it. We find or breed a reed that can filter it, that turns a poison into a resource. We go to the northern farmers not with protests, but with a business proposal for this new reed. We make balance profitable." The strategy shifted. The Ugallu project became a hub for a new, pragmatic ecology. They partnered with geneticists to enhance native salt-filtering reeds. They worked with economists to design carbon and salinity credits for the marsh dwellers. They used the ancient story, now beautifully rendered in a graphic novel by a local artist, to teach schoolchildren about adaptive resilience. Years later, the saline plume had not vanished, but it had been integrated. A new hybrid reed belt, nicknamed the Guardian's Fringe, thrived along its edges, commercially valuable for biomass and providing a new habitat for birds. The story of the Lion of the Water was taught in Iraqi schools alongside lessons in environmental science. On a monitoring trip to the ancient site of Eridu, now a fenced archaeological plot overlooking the vast, recovering marshes, Lila stood with Haji Majid. The tell was just a mound, a pimple on the vast plain. No hum, no presence. "Do you think he's truly gone?" Lila asked, the scholar in her still yearning for the concrete. Haji Majid bent down, picked up a handful of soil, and let it sift through his fingers. It was a mix of brown earth, gray salt crust, and tiny white shell fragments. "He is not a he anymore, Doctor. He is an is. Is the law of gravity in the stone, or is it the stone that falls? He is the reason this place," he gestured to the sprawling green-gold marsh, "still has a pulse when the whole world seems sick. You cannot find him in a bone or a stone. You find him in the stubborn life that refuses to die. You find him in the clever idea that finds a way. You are not his descendant. You are his proof." The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of life and decay, of struggle and survival. In the distance, the late afternoon sun caught the wings of a marsh harrier, turning them to bronze. It cried out, a sharp, piercing sound that sliced across the millennia. A sound that would have been familiar to a storm demon with a lion's head and eagle's feet, to a shepherd named Harbu, to an archaeologist named Finch. The story ends here, on this mound of forgotten bricks, with a woman and an elder looking at a thriving, difficult, beautiful world. The Ugallu's biopic is complete. His consciousness has returned to the system. But the function he embodied, the negotiation, the protection, the steadfast hold on balance, is awake.
It is awake in the data, in the reads, in the policies, and in the hearts of those who choose to listen to the quiet, persistent song of the world, urging it to persist, to adapt, to weave.